Imagine lying in bed at night, but your thoughts won't stop racing. Your body is tired, but your mind keeps playing the same worries on repeat. What you didn't do, what could go wrong, what still isn't enough. You try to relax, but peace feels far away. The truth is, most people don't fall asleep. They crash, exhausted, restless, and still holding on to everything they were supposed to let go of. But what if bedtime wasn't the end of a stressful day, but the beginning of inner healing? What if you could train your mind to release, to rest, and to find peace from within, no matter what happened during the day? Tonight, you're going to discover Buddhist teachings that aren't just ancient words. They are living wisdom that can calm your nervous system, clear your mind, and reconnect you to a deeper stillness you forgot you had. These aren't just tips to sleep better. They are powerful mental shifts that will help you stop overthinking, stop carrying emotional weight, and let your spirit breathe. So get ready, because after this, sleep won't just be sleep. It will be a return to peace. Before we begin, make a quiet promise to yourself. Write in the comments, "Tonight, I choose peace. I am present." You're not just writing a sentence. You're opening the door to a calmer mind. And the more you remind yourself of that truth, the easier it becomes to feel it. So write it down now, and let's begin this journey inward. And now, let's begin. If true peace is something that can be felt, not forced, then this first lesson is where that journey truly begins. There's a quiet power that doesn't shout, doesn't seek attention, and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. It doesn't dress itself in pride, and it doesn't crumble under criticism. It simply bows, not out of defeat, but out of understanding. That's the power of humility, not the fake kind that pretends to be small while secretly craving applause, but the kind that comes from a deep place of self-awareness, a place where peace begins to breathe. Most people misunderstand humility. They think it means lowering themselves. They think it means making their needs less important or pretending they don't have strengths. But that's not humility. That's self-erasure. And self-erasure is not peaceful, it's painful. It leads to inner conflict. The heart starts fighting with the mind. One side says, "Speak up." The other says, "Stay quiet." One says, "You deserve better." The other says, "Don't make trouble." And in that tug-of-war, peace gets strangled. True humility, the kind taught by Buddhist masters and lived by monks who have nothing but still seem to have everything, doesn't erase the self. It reveals the truth of it. Humility is not about becoming invisible. It's about becoming clear. It's the art of stepping back from the ego without stepping out of your life. It says, "I don't need to dominate. I don't need to hide. I just need to be honest about where I stand." This kind of humility begins when you stop trying to control how others see you. Because let's be honest, half of our suffering comes from trying to maintain an image. We want to be seen as strong, capable, wise, important. But the truth is, most of the time we're just guessing, hoping we're doing okay. When we finally admit that we don't know everything, that we sometimes feel lost, that we're learning as we go, it's not weakness, it's freedom. The masks fall, and what's left is peace. In Buddhist teachings, there's a phrase, "Bow to what is." That bow is not just physical, it's a posture of the mind. It means accepting the truth of the moment without resistance. If anger arises, bow to it. If fear shows up, bow to it. Not because you love it, not because you want it to stay, but because it's real. And bowing to what is real takes strength. It disarms the fight. And when the fight ends, something softer can begin. People confuse this with giving up. But humility is not about surrendering your dreams. It's about surrendering your delusions. Delusions like, I must always be right. I must always look good. I must never fail. These ideas are heavy. They crush peace. And when you drop them, not because someone told you to, but because they no longer serve you, you find lightness again. Humility also has the power to heal relationships. Not by making you the one who always apologizes, but by making you the one who listens. Most arguments aren't about truth. They're about ego. Who gets the last word? Who was more hurt? Who gets to be the victim? But humility steps out of the courtroom and says, I'm not here to win. I'm here to understand. That's when walls come down. That's when hearts open. It's easy to say, I'm a humble person. It's harder to practice humility when someone insults you, when someone overlooks you, when someone misunderstands your silence. The ego wants to correct, defend, fight back, but the humble mind says, I don't need to prove my worth. I know who I am, even if you don't. That knowing, quiet, grounded, unshakable, is the root of real peace. In Buddhism, humility is often paired with mindfulness, because you can't be humble if you're not aware of your own reactions. Every time you get offended, every time you feel superior, every time you need to be right, it's a chance to pause, to look inward, to ask, where is this coming from? Often, it's fear. Fear of being dismissed, fear of being unseen, fear of being wrong. But when you acknowledge that fear without judging it, you've already taken the first step toward dissolving it. There's a reason monks bow so often. It's not a performance, it's a training. Each bow is a reminder. This moment is bigger than me. This life is not mine to control. This path is walked with reverence, not arrogance. And when you live that way, not just in temples, but in traffic, in arguments, in grief, you begin to feel a calm that doesn't depend on your mood, your success, or anyone's opinion of you. It's also important to understand that humility doesn't mean self-neglect. You can still speak your needs, you can still have boundaries, but you do so without making yourself the center of the universe. You don't demand attention. You don't shrink into silence either. You simply speak from truth, not from the ego's craving for validation. Peace comes when the voice inside you no longer shouts to be seen, when it no longer needs applause or agreement to feel real. Humility is what silences that shouting, not by muting your worth, but by no longer negotiating it. You start to understand that your value doesn't go up when people like you, and it doesn't go down when they don't. It just is. And that stillness of knowing you don't need to be anything more or less is what Buddhists call the middle way. You may notice that when humility enters your life, so does patience. You stop rushing to conclusions. You stop trying to fix people. You stop needing to always be one step ahead. And when patience grows, tension fades. You start to see people not as threats or projects, but as fellow travelers, also trying to figure it all out. That perspective softens your judgments. It creates spaciousness inside you, and that spaciousness is where peace makes its home. Even in moments of success, humility keeps you grounded. It whispers, "This too will pass. Don't cling to the applause." And in moments of failure, it says, "This too will pass. Don't cling to the shame." Either way, humility keeps you steady. It stops the roller coaster, and in that steadiness, your nervous system relaxes. Your breath deepens. Your sleep becomes easier. Your thoughts become quieter. There's an old Zen story of a student who came to a master with questions. He spoke at length, showing off all he knew. The master served tea and kept pouring until the student's cup overflowed. "Why did you do that?" the student asked. The master replied, "Your mind is like this cup. How can I fill it if it's already full?" That's the heart of humility. Emptying your cup, not to be less, but to make room for more wisdom, more peace, more truth. This doesn't mean you stop trusting yourself. In fact, humility allows deeper self-trust. Because when you let go of the ego's noise, your inner wisdom has space to speak. You start making decisions not from fear or pride, but from clarity. You stop needing constant reassurance. You stop chasing perfection. You live more lightly, more honestly, more peacefully. One of the most overlooked aspects of humility is its quiet courage. It takes strength to admit when you're wrong. It takes even more to stay silent when you know someone misunderstood you. But every time you choose that kind of strength, not out of fear, but out of peace, you're building a new kind of self-respect. The kind that isn't shaken by criticism or inflated by praise. People often chase peace by trying to control their outer world. But humility flips that on its head. It says, stop trying to make everyone treat you a certain way. Start noticing how you treat your own mind. That's where the real power is, because when you stop needing to win, you start winning the moments that truly matter. The quiet ones, the present ones, the ones where you're just fully here. Even forgiveness becomes easier when humility leads the way. You stop needing to hold grudges to protect your pride. You stop keeping score. You realize that forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing you from the weight of resentment. And every grudge you let go of is one less stone in the backpack of your mind. Peace doesn't come from adding more. It comes from subtracting what never belonged. And the ego, while it means well, is often the source of that clutter. It wants to defend, compare, impress, control. But humility says, let it go, you don't need it. And the more you let go, the lighter you feel. The more you stop clinging to roles and stories and expectations, the more room you create for rest. Real rest, the kind that reaches your soul. This kind of living is not weakness, it's not passivity, it's clarity. When you bow to what is, when you stop fighting reality and trying to be someone you're not, you become untouchable in the best way. Insults pass through you. Praise doesn't trap you. Fear loses its grip. You start to live, not as a character in a drama, but as a presence in peace. And isn't that what the soul really craves? Not more achievements, not more admiration, just rest from the internal war. Humility is how that rest begins. Not by giving everything up, but by finally giving up the need to be someone you're not. This is the first doorway. Step through it gently. Peace is already waiting. And now that we've gently opened the door to peace through humility, by loosening the grip of the ego and softening the inner stance, we step into a space far quieter, yet even more transformative. Because after the bow comes the pause. And it's in that pause, between wanting and having, between seeking and grasping, where the stillness begins to hum. There's a subtle space that exists in every human mind. A space so quiet, so easily overlooked, that most people go their whole lives without noticing it. It lives between two desires, between the end of one craving and the birth of another. That space is not empty in a lifeless way. It's empty in the way a calm ocean is empty of waves, but full of depth. This is where peace waits, not in the satisfaction of desire, but in the silence between them. Most people don't know how to rest in this space. They go from one craving to the next, like stepping stones across a river. One desire isn't even fully fulfilled before the next one begins. The mind says, "I need this," and as soon as it's gained, it says, "Now I need that." It's endless, it's exhausting, and it creates a background noise in life that never stops. But if we slow down, if we pause between those cravings, something incredible happens. The noise fades, the mind softens, a new kind of silence is heard. Buddhism calls this nirodha, the cessation. Not the death of life, but the gentle dissolving of grasping. When you're no longer chasing or reaching or pulling life toward you, and you're also not pushing it away, there's just this open space. You're not clinging, you're not resisting, you're just being. That state is where freedom breathes. This isn't about suppressing desire. Suppression creates tension. It turns desire into a locked box instead of a passing breeze. This is about seeing the nature of desire clearly, watching it rise, watching it peak, watching it fall away, and choosing to rest in the still point before the next one takes its place. That still point is not boring. It's alive. It's the pause that makes all peace possible. It happens in micro moments all day long. You finish your coffee, and before your hand reaches for your phone, there's a second. That second is pure. If you catch it, if you rest there, even for a breath, it stretches, it deepens, it becomes a doorway. But most miss it. The hand grabs, the habit kicks in, the mind moves forward without ever stopping. Desire is not evil, but it's relentless. It's designed to continue. The job of desire is to keep us reaching, and while that reaching is what drives progress, it also drives suffering, because the mind becomes addicted to motion, to having something just out of reach, and peace, real peace, can't survive in constant motion. It needs stillness, not for hours, not for years, just for now. There's a kind of discipline in learning to rest between cravings. Not a harsh one, a tender, aware discipline. The discipline of presence. When you feel the urge to check something, buy something, say something, react to something, pause. Don't forbid the action, just wait, breathe, observe. In that breath, you'll notice something sacred. You're not the craving, you're the one noticing it. That distinction is life-changing. Because if you are not your desire, then you are also not your restlessness. You are not your grasping. You are not your hunger. You are the quiet that holds it, the sky that holds the clouds. That realization doesn't come from thinking. It comes from pausing, from sitting in the silence between desires. This silence also reveals what truly matters. When you rest in it, you start to see which desires are real and which are just echoes. Some are deep and meaningful. The desire to connect, to grow, to serve. Others are just noise, cravings born from boredom, from marketing, from loneliness disguised as urgency. In the pause, the false ones dissolve. Only what is real remains. Even pleasure becomes deeper when you know how to rest between desires, because you're no longer rushing from one moment to the next. You taste, you feel, you receive, and when it's done, you let go. You don't drag the experience into the next hour. You don't chase it in the next activity. You let the silence speak, and it always has something to say. Monks practice this silence not just in meditation, but in walking, eating, breathing. Every moment becomes an opportunity to rest in the pause. It's not a pause of doing nothing. It's a pause of non-grasping. They eat slowly, not because they have nothing to do, but because they have everything to feel. And feeling deeply requires stillness. In modern life, we're trained to fill every pause. Waiting in line, check your phone, commercial break, open another tab, awkward silence, talk. But the truth is, the silence is not the enemy. It's the teacher. It's where your nervous system resets. It's where the answers arise without force. It's where your soul gets a word in. If you can learn to sit in this silence, even for a few seconds a day, the ripple effects are enormous. You'll start to feel less anxious, less reactive, less consumed by things that don't matter. You'll start to experience life as a flow rather than a chase, and the flow always feels more peaceful than the pursuit. This teaching is subtle but powerful. It doesn't give you more things to do. It gives you permission to stop grasping, to stop rushing, to stop needing every moment to deliver something. And in that stopping, there's peace. Not peace because the world is perfect. Peace because you're no longer pushing the world to be different. It's easy to believe that peace will come after the next achievement, the next relationship, the next breakthrough. But Buddhist wisdom flips that belief. It says, peace is here, right now, between the last desire and the next. It's been waiting, but it won't shout. You have to get quiet enough to hear it. When you do, something shifts. You stop running. You start arriving, not once, again and again, with every pause, with every breath. You find your way back, not to a new self, but to the self that was there all along, beneath the wanting. Even physical relaxation deepens in this space. Muscles unclench, jaws soften, eyes close not from exhaustion, but from release. The body knows when the mind stops grasping, and it responds. Sleep becomes deeper. Thoughts become fewer. You stop dreaming of what's next and start resting in what is. That's not passivity, that's presence, and presence is always enough. There is also a kind of kindness that grows in this silence, because you start to see that everyone else is also being pulled by their cravings, their fears, their distractions. You start to forgive more easily. You judge less. You don't take things so personally. You know they're just caught in the current, like you once were, and that recognition, that's compassion. This pause between desires becomes your sanctuary. You don't have to travel to find it. You don't need silence around you. You just need to notice the stillness that's already inside. Like a pond under the ripples. It was never gone, just hidden. In that stillness, your identity softens. You stop needing to define yourself by what you achieve or acquire. You become less the one who is always trying, and more the one who is always here. That shift doesn't make you lazy. It makes you clear. It makes you whole. Eventually, the pause is no longer just a break between cravings. It becomes the home you return to, a resting place, a reset. And in that place, you begin to understand a deeper truth, that peace isn't found by getting everything you want. It's found by no longer being enslaved by wanting. When you sit with this long enough, even the desire for peace becomes less frantic. It turns into a gentle longing, and then even that longing dissolves. What's left is presence. Still, silent, alive, not chasing, not hiding, just here. That's the silence between desires. That's where you'll find what you've been looking for, not out there, but in the space you've been skipping over your whole life. Breathe, feel it, let it hold you, let it teach you, let it be enough. Once the craving quiets and the silence between desires starts to feel like home, there comes a subtler kind of unrest, one that wears the mask of virtue. It doesn't scream like anger or push like greed. It whispers with good intentions. It says, fix this, improve that. You're almost there. It sounds helpful, even noble, but underneath it carries the same unrest that craving does, a more socially accepted form of restlessness, the obsession with self-improvement. The modern world is built on this obsession. Everywhere you turn, there's a message. Become better. Be more productive. Get more focused. Heal faster. Evolve constantly. And while growth can be meaningful, the endless pursuit of self-betterment can quietly become its own kind of prison. It never lets you rest. It never says you are enough. It always moves the finish line. And in that movement, peace is lost. Buddhism calls this cycle samsara, the wheel of suffering. Not just external suffering, but internal spinning, wanting, fixing, trying, failing, trying again. Not because we're broken, but because we've been trained to believe we're not okay as we are. The self-improvement mind feeds on that belief. It treats life like a self-upgrade project that never ends. At first glance, this seems harmless. After all, what's wrong with wanting to grow? Nothing, unless the root of that growth is self-rejection. If your drive to improve comes from the belief that you're not lovable unless you change, then your pursuit becomes a form of self-violence, a disguised war against who you are now. Contentment in Buddhism is not complacency. It's clarity. It's knowing when striving is helpful and when it's harming, when action is coming from wisdom and when it's coming from fear. The fixer mind always runs on fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being left behind. Fear of standing still. But stillness, when rooted in awareness, is not stagnation. It's a return to your center. This is why Buddhist practice places such strong emphasis on acceptance. Not because change is bad, but because change must grow from still soil. If you're always uprooting yourself to be better, your roots never settle. You never feel safe in your own being, and safety is what allows true transformation to unfold, not panic, not pressure, not perfectionism. Many people think they are practicing self-care, but they are actually practicing self-correction. Every journal entry, every workout, every meditation becomes another attempt to finally fix what feels wrong inside. But that energy, though it looks like healing, is secretly exhausting. It says, "I'll be okay when," instead of, "I am okay now, even as I grow." The irony is, peace never waits at the end of improvement. It waits underneath the need to improve. Not because growth is wrong, but because it's not where your worth comes from. You are not a problem to solve. You are a process to witness. And that witnessing, calm, kind, curious, is what softens suffering. Even spiritual growth can become a trap. The ego loves to dress up as the seeker. It says, "I'm more evolved now. I'm purer than before. I'm almost enlightened." But enlightenment isn't a badge. It's the dropping of all badges. It's not a higher version of yourself. It's the quiet joy of being no one in particular. The fixer mind struggles with this idea. It wants checkpoints. It wants measurable wins. It asks, "How do I know I'm getting better?" But the truth is, the signs of true growth are invisible. Less reactivity, more softness, deeper presence, easier laughter. These don't come from forcing, they come from letting go. There's a gentle teaching in Buddhism called santosha, or contentment. It doesn't mean settling for less. It means opening to what's already here without resistance. It's the space where healing happens, not because you chase it, but because you've stopped running, because you've finally sat still long enough to listen. This sitting still is radical in a culture addicted to fixing, because to sit still means to face what is, without trying to escape it, without needing to edit yourself. That kind of honesty feels unfamiliar, even scary. But it's also the doorway to deep relief. Many people are afraid that if they stop trying to improve, they'll become lazy. But the opposite is true. When the pressure to prove yourself lifts, a natural energy returns. Not one driven by shame or comparison, but one driven by clarity. You act not because you're not enough, but because you're connected to something meaningful. This shift changes everything. You stop chasing the ideal version of yourself. You stop measuring your worth by how productive you were today. You stop grinding your soul down just to keep up with others who are also secretly tired. And instead, you start honoring the rhythm of your own becoming. The fixer mind often says, "I need to be more disciplined." But Buddhist discipline is different. It's not based on force, it's based on devotion. You practice not because you hate where you are, but because you love where practice brings you, even if it's messy, even if it's slow. This path is not about deleting your goals, it's about softening your grip on them. Want to grow? Grow. But do it from peace, not pressure. Do it because your soul is ready, not because your ego is scared. Real change doesn't shout, it whispers, it waits for quiet hearts. It arrives through still doors. Perfectionism is the shadow side of improvement. It whispers, "You must get this right. You must never slip. You must always be becoming." But the Buddha never said, "Be perfect." He said, "Be awake." And awakening is messy. It's falling down and getting up. It's laughing at yourself with kindness. It's not a straight line. It's a spiral that deepens over time. And in that spiral, there are pauses, not setbacks, not failures, just pauses, moments to breathe, to reflect, to feel the ground beneath your feet again. The fixer mind hates these pauses. It calls them lazy. But Buddhist wisdom says they are sacred because they are honest, and honesty is peace. You may still want to grow, to learn, to evolve. That's natural. But the energy behind that wanting can shift from craving to curiosity, from shame to joy, from panic to presence. You can move forward with a peaceful heart, with no whip behind you, no inner critic screaming directions. This is the end of the fixer mind, when you no longer seek healing because you believe you're broken, but because you know you're whole, and you want to live that wholeness more deeply. That's not fixing, that's unfolding, that's not striving, that's allowing. You may notice that the less you try to be perfect, the more authentic you become. And people respond to that. They soften around you, because you're no longer trying to perform peace, you're actually living it. And that kind of presence is contagious. Your spiritual practice becomes less about getting better and more about getting real. You stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What's true for me?" And truth, no matter how raw, is always more peaceful than pretense. There's a Buddhist story about a cracked pot that leaks water on the way back from the well. The pot feels ashamed until it learns that the path it leaks on has bloomed into a garden, not despite its cracks, but because of them. That's the gift of letting go of perfection, discovering beauty in what you thought needed fixing. You are not your productivity. You are not your performance. You are not your ability to meet every goal. You are the one who breathes beneath all of that. And that one is already enough. The fixer mind doesn't want to hear this, but your heart does, because your heart is tired and it's ready to rest. So let this be the rest you didn't know you needed, the permission you didn't know you were waiting for, to grow slowly, to heal imperfectly, to live as a being in progress, not a project in repair. Release the tight grip, bow to your own enoughness, and let peace rise, not as a prize, but as your natural state, always here, always waiting, beneath the noise of becoming. When the fixer finally sits down and the exhausting chase for self-perfection falls quiet, there's a new kind of discomfort that begins to stir, something quieter but equally disruptive. Not the loud voice of "be better," but the crowded murmur of everything we've picked up along the way. Opinions, beliefs, judgments, titles, self-labels, all talking at once in the background of the mind. This is the moment to face the real weight we carry, not in our hands, but in our heads. Most of what disturbs peace doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from how full we've become, full of mental noise, full of ideas about how things should be, full of old stories about who we are. And when the mind is full, stillness can't enter. Even the softest whisper of peace needs space to be heard. There's an old Zen story about a university professor who visited a master to learn about enlightenment. The master served tea, but kept pouring even after the cup overflowed. The professor cried out, "It's full," and the master replied, "Just like this cup, your mind is too full to receive anything new." That's the heart of this lesson. Peace is not something you add to your life. It's something that shows up when you empty the cup. Most of us were never taught how to empty. We were taught how to gather knowledge, gather opinions, gather status. We learned to build an identity brick by brick until the structure became so tall that it blocked the sun. But now it's time to learn the opposite. Not to become less, but to carry less, to loosen the grip on all the things that define us but don't serve us. Because peace doesn't live in clutter. It lives in space. Releasing mental clutter begins with recognizing it. That voice that says, "I always mess things up." That automatic judgment of others. That quick defensiveness when someone disagrees. These are not truths. They're residues. Old sediments sitting at the bottom of the mind, clouding the clarity of the present. And the first step to stillness is noticing that they're not part of you. They're patterns. They can be released. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting who you are. It means questioning who you've been told you have to be. It means gently setting aside the roles you've over-identified with, the achiever, the worrier, the helper, the perfectionist, and sitting for a while without any role at all. Not because you've failed at them, but because you've outgrown the need to be defined by them. Inner stillness comes when you don't need to explain yourself, not even to yourself. When the narrative falls away, when the opinion loses its sharp edge, when the judgment loses its urgency, that's where peace breathes. It breathes not in rightness, but in presence. And presence doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. We often cling to opinions as if they're oxygen, but most of the time they're more like smoke. They cloud the room. They fill conversations with static. They keep the mind spinning in the illusion of control. This is good. That is bad. I'm right. They're wrong. But the more you insist on being right, the more you miss the quiet truth that doesn't argue. It simply rests. Buddhist wisdom teaches that clinging, even to what seems helpful, creates suffering. That includes clinging to being right, clinging to identity, clinging to my way. These are all forms of tightness, and tightness is the opposite of peace. When the mind is tense, the body follows, the breath shortens, the jaw clenches, the heart feels heavy. But when the grip loosens, the entire system begins to soften. And it's not just about others. The thoughts we carry about ourselves are often the heaviest. I'm too sensitive. I'm not spiritual enough. I should be further along. These are just thoughts, but repeated often enough, they become like furniture in a room we never rearrange. Letting go starts by questioning, who put this here? Do I still need it? Sometimes just asking is enough to begin the clearing. There's no need to throw away everything at once. This isn't about emptying the mind until it's blank. It's about making space for silence, for reflection, for moments that don't need interpretation. Stillness doesn't come when the mind is stuffed with conclusions. It comes when the mind becomes curious again, open, receptive, like an empty cup waiting for fresh tea. One way to begin this process is through pausing before labeling. A situation arises, a thought appears, and instead of immediately deciding what it means, you wait, you watch, you let it unfold. That pause is sacred. It's a small act of rebellion against the mind's addiction to labeling everything, and in that pause, truth has room to surface. This also applies to conversations. So much tension comes from needing to defend your views, to protect your image, to control how you're seen. But what if you didn't? What if you could listen fully, speak simply, and let the rest be? That's not weakness. That's wisdom. It's the kind of clarity that doesn't require decoration. You may also notice that judgments lose their grip when you stop feeding them. A judgment appears about yourself or someone else, and you don't wrestle with it. You don't justify it. You don't shame it. You just let it pass, like clouds in a sky that doesn't need to be clear to be vast. That kind of seeing is peace. It's not about perfection. It's about perspective. Mental clutter also builds up from overconsumption. Constant input, endless scrolling, opinion after opinion packaged as truth. But the mind can only process so much before it begins to swell. The path to peace is not paved with more information. It's paved with intention, with the willingness to say, "That's enough for now," and then to sit, to walk, to breathe without feeding the next mental loop. Releasing clutter means returning to presence, not by forcing silence, but by recognizing when noise is no longer useful. When thought becomes background music and you choose to listen instead to the breath, to the rustle of leaves, to the heartbeat. These aren't distractions, they are anchors, and every time you return to them, the mind clears a little more. Identity can be one of the most stubborn forms of clutter. We believe we are what we've done, what we've failed at, what we've survived. But the truth is, none of those define us. They shape us, yes, but they don't confine us. Who you are is not a label, it's an awareness, a presence. And that presence is beyond description. When you touch that presence, even briefly, opinions become less urgent. Labels feel too small. You don't need to reduce yourself to fit a box anymore. You just rest, fully, here. Stillness is not about doing less, it's about carrying less. And what we carry mentally is often heavier than what we carry in our hands. Regret, fear, comparison. These can feel endless, but they're all tied to thoughts that have overstayed their welcome. When you notice them with kindness, when you say, "Thank you, but I don't need you right now," something begins to shift. The room inside you expands. That expansion doesn't need an audience. You don't need to broadcast your letting go. This isn't about becoming a different person. It's about becoming lighter as you are, dropping the excess. And when you do, life doesn't shrink. It opens. Your attention becomes sharper. Your heart becomes softer. Your rest becomes deeper. In this space, peace doesn't feel like an achievement. It feels like a return, like remembering a song you forgot you loved, a stillness you once knew before the world told you who to be. And in that remembering, the noise begins to fade, not because you fought it, but because you stopped feeding it. Release doesn't always feel dramatic. Sometimes it's just a small breath, a gentle nod, a choice to let the moment be enough without wrapping it in commentary. And when those moments begin to string together, you don't just feel peaceful, you become peace itself. This is the gift of the empty teacup. It doesn't offer more. It offers less. Less noise, less need, less identity. And in that less, you find everything that was missing: clarity, ease, and the deep, quiet joy of simply being. And now that the mind has begun to empty, clearing away the clutter of identity, opinions, and inner noise, what remains is a space that quietly asks to be filled with something simpler. Not more thoughts, not more effort, just breath. That soft, steady rhythm that has always been there, patiently waiting to become your home again. When everything else is too much, the breath stays. When the world spins too fast, the breath slows. It asks for nothing, and yet it gives everything. Breathing is the one thing always within reach. It's the first thing done at birth, and the last thing done before death. And in between, it's often forgotten, taken for granted, overlooked in the rush to think, to speak, to act, to solve. But Buddhist wisdom teaches that the breath is not background. It's the doorway, a refuge, a temple that moves with you, a place of safety that cannot be taken, only ignored. Many people try to find peace by controlling the outer world, but the breath is the inner world's anchor. It grounds the nervous system, it steadies the emotions, and it gently pulls attention out of thoughts and into presence. But not just any breathing. What heals is conscious breathing, when awareness touches the breath, when the inhale is noticed, when the exhale is received. This isn't a technique, it's a relationship. To breathe consciously is to say, I am here, not in the next hour, not in the past mistake, not in the what-ifs. Here. And in that here, the weight of overthinking starts to lift. The chaos begins to unravel. And even if life outside remains noisy, the life inside begins to hum with something quieter. There is a sacred rhythm inside every breath, expansion and letting go, receiving and releasing, holding and surrendering. This rhythm is not random. It reflects the nature of everything. Every emotion, every season, every stage of life follows this wave. To sync with it is to stop fighting time, stop fighting change, stop fighting the flow. And when the fight ends, peace begins. Most suffering begins when the mind disconnects from this rhythm. It races ahead. It digs into the past. It spins in judgment. And as it does, the breath shortens. It becomes shallow, tight, forced. The body tenses. The heartbeat quickens. The breath becomes an echo of the mind's panic. But the moment you return to it, softly, not with force, you begin to reset everything. No therapy, no lecture, just breath. That's why monks spend hours in breath meditation, not because they're doing nothing, but because they're training the mind to rest. Breath after breath, they come back from thought, back from craving, back from fear. They don't push the mind, they guide it, gently, like leading a child back to bed after a nightmare. And each time they return, something opens. A gap between thoughts, a softness in the chest, a stillness beneath the worry. The breath becomes not just oxygen, but medicine. A bridge back to presence, back to safety, back to a peace that doesn't depend on anyone's behavior or on anything going right. This is not about forcing the breath to be perfect. It's not a performance. In fact, the breath teaches the opposite: acceptance. Some breaths are smooth, some are jagged, some carry emotion, some feel blocked. That's okay. The point isn't to fix them, it's to be with them, to trust that the breath is wiser than the mind, that it knows what you need before you do. In moments of stress, the breath can be a lighthouse, not by making the storm stop, but by keeping you from crashing against it. All it takes is a moment of noticing. One inhale, one exhale, one decision to pause before reacting. And that pause, over time, becomes a habit, a refuge, a way of walking through chaos without becoming it. Even in the darkest moments, the breath remains. When words fail, when thoughts scream, when nothing makes sense, there's still breath. And if you can hold on to it, if you can return to it, you haven't lost yourself. You're still anchored. You're still here. That kind of trust doesn't come from theory. It comes from practice. Every time you sit with your breath, not as something to manage, but as something to honor, you build a new relationship. One built not on control, but on reverence. You start to feel held even when you're alone. And that feeling becomes your safety net. You might be surprised by how much emotion the breath holds. Old grief surfaces, long-forgotten anxiety rises. That's not a sign of failure, it's healing. The breath doesn't bury things, it reveals them, gently, so you can meet what's been hidden with presence instead of avoidance. That's how trauma softens, not through analysis alone, but through presence with the body. And the breath is the body's most tender language. Daily breath awareness changes more than just stress levels. It changes how you speak, how you listen, how you move through the world. You become slower to anger, quicker to forgive. Not because you're trying to be spiritual, but because your nervous system is no longer hijacked, because you're no longer living in a breathless panic. Even simple routines change. Eating becomes slower. Driving becomes calmer. Waiting becomes restful instead of frustrating. Because your mind is no longer hunting for stimulation, it's content in breath, in now. And that kind of presence is not neutral, it's warm, it's filled with quiet joy, the kind of joy that doesn't need to be shouted to be felt. Trusting the breath means trusting life. The rhythm that carries the inhale and exhale is the same rhythm that carries birth and death, gain and loss, rise and fall. When you align with it, you stop demanding that life go your way. You stop treating discomfort as a problem. You begin to relax into the wave. And in that surrender, control becomes less necessary, because presence replaces it. This doesn't mean giving up direction. You can still set goals, make plans, take action, but now you do it from a place of grounded awareness. You know when to move and when to pause, when to speak and when to listen. Because you're not reacting anymore, you're responding from a place of wholeness. There's an ancient saying, "As the breath is, so is the mind." If your breath is rushed, your mind is unsettled. If your breath is deep and steady, your mind follows. This is not poetic. It's biological. It's spiritual. It's how the system works. And the beauty is, you don't need to change the mind directly. You can begin with breath, and everything else shifts on its own. Many spiritual traditions see the breath as sacred. In some languages, The word for breath is the same as the word for spirit. That's not a coincidence. Breath is life's whisper, and when you listen to it deeply enough, you begin to feel guided, not by ego, not by fear, but by something older, something deeper, something quiet and wise. Over time, the breath becomes more than a practice. It becomes a companion in meetings, in arguments, in sleepless nights. It's always there. You don't need to explain it. You just return, again and again, and that returning becomes your strength. Even creativity changes when it's rooted in breath. Ideas come more clearly. Decisions are made with less doubt. Because your mind is no longer tangled, it's spacious. And in that space, inspiration flows more easily. Insight arrives without force. But all of this begins with the simplest step: noticing. Noticing that the breath has been shallow, noticing that the chest is tight, and choosing in that moment to soften, not to fix, just to soften. That one act, repeated throughout the day, rewires the entire experience of living. Eventually, the breath becomes your home, not a place you visit, but a place you live from. And living from breath means living from presence, from stillness, from trust, even when things are uncertain, even when fear visits. You meet those moments not with panic, but with one inhale, one exhale, and peace remains. So return now, to the breath, to yourself, to this moment. There is nothing else more important than this rhythm, nothing more healing, nothing more sacred, because when breath becomes a refuge, you are never truly lost again. Now that the breath has become steady and sacred, a soft rhythm that grounds presence without needing permission, it's time to explore what often pulls us away from that rhythm: our emotions. Even with the calmest breath, the mind can still get swept into emotional storms. Not because emotions are wrong, but because we often mistake them for truth, for reality, for who we are. This confusion doesn't just disturb peace, it rewrites the world through a distorted lens. And to return to stillness, we must learn a new relationship with how we feel. Emotions are not the enemy. They're not signs of weakness or failure. They're messengers, temporary experiences passing through the body and mind. But when they arrive, especially the loud ones, anger, fear, shame, sorrow, they tend to take over the room. They sit at the head of the table and speak as if they know everything, and most of the time, we listen without question. We feel fear and assume something is wrong. We feel sadness and decide life is broken. We feel anger and believe someone else is the cause of all our suffering. But emotions are not facts. They are reflections. They echo thoughts, past wounds, unmet needs. They reflect energy, but not always truth. The mind, when left unchecked, becomes a mirror that absorbs every emotion and believes it's real. It reflects sadness and calls it self-worth. It reflects anxiety and calls it destiny. It reflects anger and calls it righteousness. But what if the mind isn't meant to be a mirror at all? What if it's meant to be a window, clear, open, letting experiences pass through without clinging? Buddhism teaches that attachment to emotion is one of the deepest sources of suffering. Not the emotion itself, but the belief that it defines us, that it must be followed, that it reveals something solid and final. But nothing about emotion is final. It rises and fades like weather. It's real in the moment, but it doesn't last. And what doesn't last cannot be your foundation. Detachment is the key, not suppression. Suppression pushes emotion down and stores it like pressure in a sealed jar. But detachment observes emotion without believing it. It feels the wave without becoming the wave. It lets the sadness rise, and instead of saying, "I am broken," it says, "Sadness is here." That small shift in language changes everything. When you detach from emotion, you give it space to breathe. You let it complete its cycle without interference. You don't resist it, and you don't indulge it. You hold it like a guest. You say, "I see you, I hear you, and I'm not you." That clarity is not cold. It's compassionate, because it stops the self from being buried by temporary feelings. Emotions often bring urgency. The mind says, "Fix this now. Say something. Run." But Buddhist mindfulness invites pause. The breath returns. The body is felt. And you begin to witness the emotion as a moving energy, not a command. You feel its intensity, but you're not trapped by it. You respond instead of react. It's easy to say, "Don't believe everything you think," but it's even more powerful to practice, "Don't believe everything you feel." That doesn't mean ignoring emotions. It means recognizing that they are not the whole truth. They are a piece of a passing story, and if you stay present, they reveal their roots. Maybe the anger is protecting old hurt. Maybe the anxiety is just unprocessed change. When you stay with them, but don't become them, they begin to unravel. Buddhist practice doesn't ask you to get rid of emotion. It asks you to stop identifying with it. To stop saying, "I am angry," and start saying, "Anger is present." That's not wordplay, it's freedom. Because when the identity steps back, peace steps forward. You're no longer the storm, you're the sky holding it. This shift takes practice, especially when emotions feel overwhelming. But even in the strongest waves, there's a part of you that can stay still, a part that breathes, that watches, that knows this will pass. That inner witness is not fragile. It's not confused. It doesn't need to explain. It just stays. Detachment also protects relationships, because when you don't believe every emotional reaction, you don't project it onto others. You take space. You reflect. You speak from clarity instead of chaos. That kind of communication heals. It prevents damage. It builds trust, not just with others, but with yourself. There is also great wisdom in tracking emotional patterns, not to judge, but to understand. Notice what triggers what. Notice the stories you attach to certain feelings. Notice how quickly you move to conclusions. Then pause. Ask, is this true? Is this helpful? Is this now? Often the answer will soften the entire experience. Detaching doesn't mean numbing, it means becoming more precise. You feel the anger, but you don't become cruel. You feel the grief, but you don't drown. You feel the fear, but you don't freeze. You stay aware, kind, and clear. That's not weakness, that's mastery. In Buddhist teachings, this awareness is cultivated through vipassana, insight meditation, watching the body, watching the mind, noticing sensation, noticing thoughts, noticing how emotions begin as sensations, tightness, heat, pressure, and evolve into stories. When you catch them early, you don't have to ride the whole story. You can choose. Stillness begins when you no longer chase peace through emotional comfort, when you allow discomfort without panic, when you hold sadness without collapse, when you feel joy without clinging. That neutrality is powerful. It doesn't dull life, it balances it. Every emotion has a message, but not every message needs to become a mission. Sometimes anger is just a spark. Sometimes anxiety is just static. When you meet them with breath, with presence, with space, they don't control you. They reveal something, and then they leave. Your job is not to silence emotion. Your job is to stay bigger than it, to hold space for it, to honor its visit, and then bow as it leaves. You don't need to chase happiness. You don't need to run from sadness. You sit, you breathe, you watch, and the storm passes. This is the path of emotional freedom. Not the absence of feeling, but the absence of slavery to feeling. You are not the mirror that reflects every passing mood. You are the awareness that notices the reflection and remains unchanged. That is peace. That is power. And in that power, you rest. You don't need every emotion to agree with your worth. You don't need every mood to confirm your path. You stay steady, awake, rooted, while everything else moves through you like wind through trees. The mind, when trained gently, stops grabbing every emotion as if it were precious. It starts letting go faster, not because it doesn't care, but because it trusts. It trusts the rhythm. It trusts the breath. It trusts that presence is enough, even when emotions are not pleasant. That trust grows every time you resist the urge to panic, to explain, to react. It grows every time you stay quiet for one more breath, every time you choose to wait before you act. That is the path of detachment. That is how you return to stillness, not through force, but through presence. And presence, once stable, becomes a refuge, a quiet place inside you where emotions may visit, but they don't get to build a home. You host them with compassion, you learn from them, and you release them, over and over, until the mind no longer believes its own storms, until the heart opens, not to drama, but to peace. Once emotions are no longer treated as truth, once the waves can rise and fall without sweeping away the center, something else begins to emerge from the quiet. A deeper pattern, a more persistent echo. Not just a passing feeling, but a full script. A personal story that the mind has been rehearsing for years. This story isn't loud like anger or sharp like fear. It's subtler. It sounds like memory, like identity, like explanation, and it follows many people around every day of their lives. But peace only begins when you see it clearly and stop mistaking it for reality. Everyone has a narrative, a version of life filtered through thoughts, shaped by experience, edited by emotion, and held together by belief. It tells who you are, what you've survived, what you deserve, what's possible, and what's always just out of reach. Some stories feel empowering, others feel heavy, but even the ones that seem helpful can keep you stuck. Because the mind doesn't just tell stories, it believes them, it lives in them, it becomes them. Buddhism offers a radical path. Unhook from the story. not by erasing the past or pretending nothing happened, but by recognizing that the story is not you. It's a lens, a version, a projection. A story is only a problem when it stops you from seeing what's here now. When the mind holds on to its version of events, it stops feeling life directly. Everything is filtered. Every moment becomes a comparison, a reference, a repetition. The mind loves a plotline. It wants a main character, a villain, a conflict, and a resolution. And often, it places you at the center, suffering, trying, searching. But peace begins when you stop needing to be the main character, when you step back and become the observer of the story instead of its lead actor. In that shift, the drama starts to dissolve, not because you fixed the plot, but because you stopped identifying with it. Thoughts will still come, memory will still visit, but without attachment, they pass through like clouds. You see the story beginning. I always mess things up. They never respected me. I should have been further by now. And you let it go. You don't fight it. You don't follow it. You just see it. And seeing is enough to break the spell. This isn't about erasing history. It's about loosening the grip on how the story defines you. Because the past is real, but it's no longer here. And every time you replay it, rehearse it, or rewrite it, you leave the present. You trade the clarity of now for the comfort of a familiar identity. But that comfort is an illusion. It keeps suffering alive by giving it structure. Some stories are so old, they feel like personality. I'm just someone who can't trust. I've always been the one who's overlooked. But those are roles, not truths. They may have once been useful to survive, to make sense of pain, but they're not required anymore. You can acknowledge what happened without becoming it. You can feel without clinging. That's where healing happens, not by retelling the pain, but by stepping out of its frame. Mindfulness helps you notice the difference between presence and plot. You're washing dishes, and the mind starts narrating a conversation from years ago. You're walking, and the brain revives an old failure. The story says, think about it more, figure it out. But the breath says, come back. The body says, we're here. The moment offers peace, but only if you choose it over the story. There's a practice in Buddhism called noting. When a thought arises, you name it gently: planning, remembering, judging, worrying. And then you let it go. No drama, no debate, just awareness. The act of noting stops the mind from becoming the thought. It gives you space, and space is where peace lives. The most powerful stories often play silently. Background narratives, the ones that say, you're behind, you're different, you're not quite enough. These don't shout, they hum beneath the surface, but they shape perception, they influence emotion, and when left unexamined, they become your worldview. But when you begin to see them, label them, and stop feeding them, something else emerges: stillness. Stillness doesn't mean forgetting who you are. It means remembering who you are beyond the story, beyond the script, beyond the identity that needs to constantly be right, loved, safe, successful. Stillness doesn't perform, it doesn't explain, it just exists. It's always been there, but the story covered it up. The story isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up in how you explain your reactions. I'm like this because of what happened. I don't trust people because of that breakup. I overwork because I'm afraid of being poor. All of these may feel true, and they may have origins in pain, but the question isn't whether they're true, it's whether they still serve you. And often they don't. Letting go of the story doesn't mean pretending things didn't hurt. It means no longer needing the hurt to keep proving itself. It means trusting that you can heal without constantly picking at the wound. It means stepping into the present without dragging the entire autobiography behind you. In Buddhist teaching, the self is described as a process, not a solid object, a stream, not a statue. When you see yourself this way, you stop needing continuity. You stop needing the story to make sense. You just live, moment to moment, with awareness, with kindness, with space to change. You also stop needing to defend your narrative. So many arguments come from needing others to agree with your version, to validate your pain, to see you the way you want to be seen. But when you unhook from the story, that need fades. You don't need your identity confirmed. You're no longer performing it. You're just being. This brings a new kind of lightness, not denial, not detachment from life, but freedom from the weight of the script. You still feel, you still care, but you don't get stuck in the same scenes. You can walk off the stage. You can rest between acts. You don't have to explain your presence. You just inhabit it. When you do this, life becomes less about interpretation and more about experience. You don't need to narrate the meal. You taste it. You don't need to relive the past. You breathe now. You don't need to rehearse the future. You trust the unfolding. That shift doesn't come from belief. It comes from practice. Start by noticing your favorite stories, the ones you tell often, about your struggle, your personality, your identity. Ask, who am I without this story? Not as a theory, but as an exploration. Sit with that question. Let the silence answer. The truth is not loud. It doesn't argue. It just is. This is not about creating a new story, a better version, a more inspiring narrative. That's still a trap. It's still mind trying to script peace. But peace doesn't need a script. It needs space. It needs presence. It needs truth. And truth is not a performance. It's what remains when the story ends. Eventually, the story becomes background noise. It might still show up, but you no longer believe it. You no longer narrate your life like a movie. You just live it, not as the star, but as awareness itself. That's not losing yourself. It's finally meeting yourself, beyond plot, beyond title, beyond scene. This is the path beyond narrative, the path where peace is not part of the story, but what arises when the story dissolves. You are not your history. You are not your thoughts. You are not the character the mind created. You are the space between the words, the silence beneath the script. And in that silence, you are already free. As the personal story begins to fade, as identification with the character loosens and presence takes the place of performance, another layer of stillness starts to surface. But alongside that stillness, a quieter fear can creep in. If the story no longer defines everything, what does? If the identity isn't fixed, where is the ground? This is where many minds instinctively reach for control, for something solid to hold. But the truth is, life was never meant to be pinned down, and peace doesn't come from certainty. It comes from learning how to rest in the unknown. The unknown is not a flaw in life's design. It's a feature. It's the space where growth lives, where change breathes, where wisdom begins. Yet, for most people, uncertainty feels like a threat, a crack in the floor, a failure to plan. But in Buddhist teachings, uncertainty is not the enemy, it's the teacher. It reveals what clinging hides, it exposes what control masks, and it brings you back to the one place that's always honest: now. The discomfort with uncertainty comes from a deep conditioning to equate peace with control. If everything goes according to plan, if every outcome is predicted, then safety feels possible. But that idea only works on paper. In real life, plans fall apart. People change. Health shifts. Loss arrives. And when peace is built on certainty, every unexpected turn feels like a crisis. But when peace is built on presence, even the unexpected can be held with calm. Buddhist practice begins by turning toward impermanence, not away from it. It teaches that nothing is fixed, not the body, not the mind, not success or failure, not joy or sorrow. Everything changes, and instead of resisting this truth, the practice is to bow to it, to soften into it, not with defeat, but with trust. Trust not that everything will be easy, but that everything will move, that nothing stays forever, including fear. When you stop fighting impermanence, a new kind of stability begins to form, not a stability of guarantees, but a stability of surrender, a groundedness that isn't shaken by change because it's rooted in reality, not fantasy. And this shift changes how you relate to everything. You stop needing answers to feel okay. You stop needing to know what's next in order to rest now. Uncertainty reveals the places where the mind still grasps, where it still says, "If only I knew, I could relax." But the deeper truth is that peace is not delayed until after clarity. Peace becomes possible in the heart of confusion, not after it's resolved. It begins when you say, "I don't know," and stop adding panic to that sentence. When you let not knowing be a full experience, not a problem to be fixed. There's wisdom in pausing before demanding answers. The mind wants to fill in gaps about the future, about other people, about meaning. But sometimes clarity doesn't come through force. It comes through space, through waiting without anxiety, through letting things unfold in their own time, and that waiting becomes sacred when it's done without resistance. One reason people struggle with uncertainty is because they link it to vulnerability. If I don't know, I might fail. I might look weak. I might lose something important. But Buddhism teaches that vulnerability is not something to escape. It's something to understand, to see that life itself is vulnerable, that every moment is unpromised, and yet here you are, breathing, living, held by something larger than your need for control. Letting go of certainty doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming spacious. It means showing up to life with curiosity instead of tension, with openness instead of defensiveness. You still move, you still act, but you do so without needing guarantees. That shift doesn't remove fear, but it removes the need to obey fear. Buddhist monks spend years contemplating impermanence, not to become detached from life, but to become intimate with it, to see the beauty in what doesn't last, to fall in love with the moment, knowing it won't return. That kind of presence is raw, it's real, and it breaks the illusion that anything can stay exactly the same forever. Even relationships change when you welcome uncertainty. You stop clinging to roles, to expectations, to fixed ideas of who people are supposed to be. You begin to meet them where they are, not where you wish they were. And in that meeting, there's more honesty, more flexibility, less disappointment. Inner storms begin to quiet when you stop needing a perfect map, when you stop trying to plot the future like a straight line. Because life was never meant to be linear. It bends, it spirals, it opens without warning. And when your peace depends on predictability, every bend feels like betrayal. But when your peace is anchored in presence, each turn becomes part of the mystery you trust. You may still feel fear. That's natural. The body is wired to seek safety. But Buddhist practice helps you differentiate between real danger and imagined threat. Uncertainty is not a tiger. It's a blank page. And if you sit with it long enough, it becomes a place of possibility, not panic. Letting go of needing to know also opens the door to intuition. When the mind quiets its search for answers, the deeper knowing, the quiet inner voice, can be heard. Not the voice of panic, not the voice of planning, but the voice of presence. It speaks in stillness, and its wisdom is often missed because the noise of needing certainty drowns it out. This path also teaches you how to hold multiple truths at once. You don't know what will happen, and you can still take care of yourself. You feel uncertain, and you're still grounded. You're unsure, and you're still whole. Life becomes less either/or and more both/and. That flexibility is what allows resilience to grow. Uncertainty also brings humility. It reminds you that you don't have all the answers. And that's not a failure. It's a relief. You don't have to know everything. You don't have to solve everything. You get to be a participant in life, not its director. And in that humility, a quiet wisdom rises, the willingness to learn, to be surprised, to adapt. Even grief changes when you welcome uncertainty. You stop demanding that things stay. You start honoring what was and holding space for what might be. That holding is soft, it's brave, and it doesn't require resolution. It only asks for presence. Buddhist teachings often compare life to a river, always moving, never the same twice. Trying to freeze a river turns it into something it's not, but floating with it, learning its currents, respecting its depth, that's peace. Not because you control the water, but because you've stopped resisting its flow. This doesn't mean giving up hope. It means releasing the need to force hope into a shape. You still dream, you still care, but you don't demand that everything go according to plan. You understand that uncertainty is the birthplace of all new things, of every beginning, of every turning point. And in that space, something sacred starts to grow. A faith not in outcomes, but in your ability to meet whatever comes. A quiet confidence rooted not in knowing, but in being, in showing up, in breathing through the questions without rushing toward answers. Eventually, the unknown stops feeling like a threat. It starts feeling like a companion, a reminder that you are not in charge of the universe, but you are deeply connected to it, that you don't need to know everything to feel safe. You only need to return to this moment, again and again. This is the blessing of uncertainty. It doesn't guarantee comfort. It invites truth. It asks you to live without a script, to breathe without prediction, to love without holding back. And in that way, it gives more than certainty ever could. Not a fixed path, but a free one. Not control, but surrender. Not answers, but peace. Once the grip on certainty loosens and presence becomes strong enough to carry questions without panic, another challenge often arises. One that's not about managing your own experience, but holding space for others. Because even in the quiet of personal peace, the suffering of others can feel overwhelming. A friend breaks down, a partner struggles, a stranger bleeds through their silence, and suddenly your heart doesn't know whether to hold or to run. This is where compassion can get tangled, and where the practice of wise compassion begins. Caring deeply is a strength, but without boundaries, that strength can become a burden. Compassion is not meant to drown you. It's meant to open you without collapse. In Buddhism, this balance is known as wise compassion. It's a love that sees clearly, a kindness that doesn't confuse helping with rescuing. It's the practice of being present with pain without becoming trapped in it. Many people think compassion means taking on others' emotions, absorbing their wounds, giving everything until there's nothing left. But that's not compassion. That's entanglement. That's the heart trying to fix what it can't control, often to avoid the discomfort of helplessness. And underneath that impulse to fix is often a fear, not of the other's pain, but of your own feelings in the presence of it. True compassion begins with steadiness, with staying rooted in your own presence even while another breaks apart. Not coldly, not distantly, but clearly. You don't need to mirror their suffering to validate it. You don't need to make their pain your home in order to care. Compassion says, I see you, I feel you, and I will not abandon you, but I will not lose myself either. This balance is subtle. The mind often rushes in with urgency. Say something, do something, solve something. But the most healing presence often comes not from action, but from space. From being able to hold another's pain without trying to erase it. That space says, your experience is safe with me. You don't have to change it. You don't have to hide it. And I don't need to carry it for you. The mistake is in thinking that love means suffering with. But empathy, when unmanaged, can become over-identification. It moves from I care about you to I am you. And that collapse creates confusion. It disables the ability to help. Because now, two people are drowning. Wise compassion doesn't disconnect. It deepens connection by staying grounded in awareness, by remembering that every being has their own karma, their own path, their own lessons. You can walk beside someone, but you can't walk it for them. That's not detachment. That's respect. That's humility. It honors the other's strength instead of assuming they need saving. This kind of compassion begins with clarity about your role. Are you being present or performing usefulness? Are you listening or trying to soothe your own discomfort? Are you offering support or trying to control the outcome? These questions are not accusations. They're anchors. They keep your presence honest. In Buddhist teaching, compassion, karuna, is always paired with wisdom. Without wisdom, compassion burns out. It becomes martyrdom. But with wisdom, compassion regenerates. It becomes sustainable. It knows when to speak and when to be silent, when to lean in and when to let go. It sees clearly that being overwhelmed helps no one. One of the most powerful shifts in this practice is learning to sit with helplessness, to feel the ache of not being able to change someone's suffering and still stay open. That openness is not weakness. It's courage. It says, I won't shut down just because I can't control this. I will stay with love, even if love can't fix it. And sometimes, staying doesn't mean being physically close. It means releasing the need to manage someone's process, especially when they push you away, especially when they don't want help. Compassion without rescue respects boundaries. It knows that people must come to their own insight in their own time. This also means letting go of resentment when your care isn't received, because often care is offered with strings, expectations of gratitude, of change, of appreciation. But true compassion gives because it's needed, not because it's noticed. It doesn't become bitterness when unnoticed. It remains clean, quiet, generous. You can care deeply and still say no. You can have compassion and still take space. You can support someone's healing and still protect your own. These are not contradictions. They are expressions of maturity, of self-awareness, of love that includes you, not just the other. Many people feel guilty when they step back, when they stop being the emotional sponge. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us, your peace is not selfish. It's necessary, because only from peace can you offer true help. Otherwise, you're just passing along your own overwhelm, offering anxiety instead of clarity, fatigue instead of care. This is especially true for empaths, those who feel others' energy deeply. Without training, empathy can become emotional fusion. You lose the line between where you end and the other begins. But with practice, empathy becomes skillful. You feel the energy, but you don't get trapped in it. You observe it like a wave, and you let it pass through. Compassion without rescue means trusting the other's strength, even when they forget it. It means seeing them not as broken, but as whole beings in temporary pain. And holding that vision helps them return to it. Not because you fixed them, but because your presence didn't add weight to their suffering. In Buddhist imagery, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara represents infinite compassion. This being hears the cries of the world, but doesn't drown in them. The Bodhisattva's compassion is not frantic. It's vast, spacious, unhurried. That's what we cultivate. Not drama, but depth. Not urgency, but understanding. There's also wisdom in knowing your limits. Sometimes you're not the right person to help. Sometimes stepping away allows others to step in. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is trust life's timing, not your own agenda. And that trust opens up a deeper surrender, a surrender that honors everyone's path. This practice also transforms how you care for yourself. When you stop rescuing others, you stop expecting to be rescued. You stop waiting for someone to save you from your feelings. You learn how to sit with your own pain the way you sit with theirs, gently, without rushing, without escaping. That self-compassion becomes your teacher. It teaches that healing doesn't mean fixing. It means feeling, allowing, witnessing, integrating. and you learn to hold your own pain with the same wise compassion. No panic, no shame, just presence. This inner relationship then reflects outward. You care for others not from lack, but from fullness. Even small interactions shift. You stop giving advice just to fill silence. You stop absorbing moods as if they're your job to manage. You listen more. You wait more. You trust more. Because you understand now, compassion is not about solving, it's about seeing. You'll still feel. You'll still care. But it won't undo you, because you're no longer trying to carry what isn't yours. You're no longer turning love into burden. You're letting love be what it was always meant to be, light, steady, clear. This is the heart of wise compassion, a compassion that walks beside, not ahead, that offers presence, not pressure, that trusts that even in suffering, something sacred is unfolding. And you don't need to control it. You just need to stay rooted, to breathe, to care without collapse. That kind of love changes everything. Not because it fixes pain, but because it refuses to abandon anyone, including yourself, in the face of it. It's the love that stays grounded, open, awake. And in that kind of love, both peace and strength are born. As the practice of wise compassion deepens, where caring no longer means carrying, and where space becomes as sacred as support, another layer of unrest begins to reveal itself. Not the pain of others this time, but the quiet, constant hum of dissatisfaction within. It's the feeling that lingers even in moments of peace, the whisper that says something is still missing. That who you are, what you have, and what you've done might never be enough. And this illusion of lack is one of the deepest roots of suffering. This feeling of not enough rarely shouts. It shows up subtly, in the impulse to improve, in the need to compare, in the discomfort with stillness. It hides behind ambition, behind productivity, even behind acts of service. It convinces the mind that peace must be earned, that joy must be justified, that wholeness is somewhere just beyond the next achievement. But Buddhism teaches a different path, a radical path, one that says enough is not a finish line, it's a decision, and contentment is not passive, it's powerful. The Dhamma, the truth of things, points to the source of our restlessness. It reveals that suffering doesn't come from what we lack, but from the belief that lack defines us. That belief becomes a lens. It colors everything. A compliment is not fully received because it doesn't match the self-image. A success doesn't feel real because the inner voice says it could have been better. Even love feels incomplete because the mind is measuring its intensity, its frequency, its proof. This illusion of lack is not just personal, it's cultural. From early on, people are trained to look for what's missing: better grades, better bodies, better lives. Contentment is seen as settling, stillness as laziness. But Buddhist wisdom turns this on its head. It says that contentment is not the absence of growth. It's the presence of awareness. It's what happens when the hunger stops controlling you. Contentment is not denial. It doesn't ignore pain or injustice. It simply means seeing clearly what is here and not needing it to be more before you can breathe fully. It means letting this moment count, not because it's perfect, but because it's real. And reality, when met without craving, becomes sacred. One of the most liberating realizations on the spiritual path is that not enough is not a truth. It's a habit, a mental groove worn deep by repetition. But like any habit, it can be seen. And once it's seen, it begins to loosen. You notice when it arises, while scrolling, while talking, while sitting in silence. The mind says, more. And in that moment, you don't need to obey. You can pause, you can breathe, you can return. This return is not glamorous. It won't win applause. But it's where real freedom lives. The freedom to stop chasing. The freedom to enjoy what you already have. The freedom to be with yourself, not as a project to fix, but as a presence to honor. In the teachings of the Buddha, contentment is linked with renunciation, not renunciation as deprivation, but as clarity. Letting go, not because you're forced to, but because you see that the chase leads nowhere, because you've run long enough to know that the finish line keeps moving. And in that seeing, you stop, you rest. That rest is not a giving up, it's a tuning in. It's the moment when the mind no longer spins to validate itself, when it no longer grabs for meaning in the next thing. It simply receives. The breath, the light, the sound, the body, as they are. Nothing added, nothing resisted. Even generosity changes when contentment takes root. You no longer give to prove worth. You no longer serve to fill a void. You give from fullness, from joy, from a place that doesn't need return. That kind of giving is rare, but it heals everyone it touches. Contentment also creates space for gratitude. Not gratitude as a performance, but as a quiet recognition. This is already a miracle. The body is breathing. The heart is still beating. The earth is still holding you up, not because you earned it, but because life continues to offer itself, even when you don't feel deserving. The illusion of lack often tries to disguise itself as improvement. I'll rest after this next step. I'll feel worthy once I achieve that. But there's always a next step, and the bar always moves. Contentment says, I can still grow without hating where I am. I can still dream without rejecting this moment. I can move forward, not from hunger, but from harmony. This shift transforms relationships too. You stop needing people to complete you. You stop measuring connection by how much it feeds your insecurity. You begin to show up differently, less needy, more open, less entitled, more generous, because you're not trying to squeeze love from others, you're offering it from within. Even solitude becomes sweeter when the illusion of lack dissolves. You're no longer alone because no one wants you. You're alone because peace is enough company. The silence no longer feels like absence. It feels like wholeness without noise. Breaking the illusion of lack also restores your energy, because the constant seeking is exhausting. The mental scanning, the emotional grasping, the chronic dissatisfaction, it drains you. But contentment replenishes. It grounds you. It replaces striving with stillness. And from that stillness, you find a new kind of strength. This is why monks can live with almost nothing and still radiate joy. It's not because they don't feel desire. It's because they've stopped obeying it. They see through it. They know that wanting never ends, but that presence does not need more to feel complete. You don't have to become a monk to feel this. You just have to question the lie that you're missing something. You have to notice the moment your mind says, "This isn't enough," and ask gently, "Who told me that?" Where did I learn that joy requires more? Even spiritual seeking can be a disguise for lack. Reading one more book, trying one more method, waiting for the breakthrough. But real peace comes not from what you add, but from what you stop feeding. When you stop making your present self the problem. When you stop postponing your wholeness. Contentment is not complacency. It's clarity. It's what allows you to act without urgency, to create without anxiety, to love without ownership, to rest without guilt. It doesn't mean nothing matters. It means this moment matters enough to be felt without needing to fix it. And contentment grows every time you choose it. When you pause before upgrading what works, when you appreciate the taste of something simple, when you stop comparing your progress, when you give your attention fully instead of chasing a better distraction. These moments seem small, but they are revolutionary. In Buddhist practice, this is often called santuti, satisfaction of the heart. It's one of the highest blessings, not because it looks impressive, but because it ends the inner war. It removes the craving to be someone else, somewhere else, doing something else. And what's left is peace, not earned, not forced, simply recognized. This is the Dhamma of enough, not the logic of consumer culture, not the push of ego, but the quiet wisdom that says, this moment holds everything. Not because it's perfect, because it's present. And presence, when met with acceptance, reveals its own kind of completeness. There will still be desires. That's natural. But they no longer rule you. You feel them, you acknowledge them, and then you ask, is this desire rooted in lack or in love, in hunger or in harmony? And from that question, your path clears. This isn't a one-time realization. It's a daily returning, 1,000 gentle no's to the voice of not enough, 1,000 quiet yeses to the miracle of now, and each return deepens the trust that you are not missing anything, that you never were. The illusion will try to return, it always does, but every time you recognize it for what it is, a habit, not a truth, it loses power. And every time you choose presence instead of proving, you reclaim your peace. This is the invitation. To stop chasing worth like it's somewhere else, to sit with what is, to feel the breath, to notice the stillness beneath the noise, and to say with your whole heart, not as a performance, but as a prayer, this is enough, I am enough, and that is more than enough. When the illusion of lack dissolves, when the quiet knowing of enoughness begins to take root, the world around you doesn't necessarily slow down to match. In fact, it often seems to speed up. News, opinions, distractions, expectations, everything presses in, demanding a reaction, pulling at your attention, feeding urgency like a fire that never stops burning. But contentment opens the doorway to something even more radical. Stillness. Not as escape, not as silence for comfort's sake, but as resistance, as clarity, as power. Because in a noisy world obsessed with reaction, choosing not to react is not weakness, it is a form of protest. Stillness is often misunderstood. It's mistaken for passivity, for disengagement. But in Buddhist thought, stillness is not emptiness, it's precision. It is the discipline of not being moved by every storm. It's the refusal to let agitation run your life. It's choosing to act from intention rather than impulse. And that choice, practiced consistently, becomes a quiet force that reshapes everything. The modern world rewards speed. It glorifies opinion. It amplifies outrage. But the Dhamma, the deep truth, points in another direction, toward awareness, toward pause, toward the space between stimulus and response. That space is where power lives. Not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind that masters the self. Non-reactivity doesn't mean indifference. It means clarity. It means seeing without immediately needing to comment, to argue, to fix. It's the strength to allow discomfort without letting it take the wheel. It's the wisdom to know that not every emotion demands an action, that not every provocation deserves a reply. This practice begins the moment you notice your triggers. Someone speaks with sharpness, a headline inflames you, a post pokes your insecurity, and the mind tightens. It wants to strike back, to correct, to defend. But instead, you pause, you breathe. You don't suppress the response, you witness it. You feel the fire rise, and then you hold it in the cradle of awareness until it cools. That holding is stillness. That is how you begin to disarm chaos with calm. Reactivity is habitual. It's fast, automatic, unconscious. It's the mind trying to reclaim control through noise. But stillness interrupts the pattern. It says, wait, look, feel, then choose. And that choosing becomes your freedom, not from pain, but from the need to make it louder. There's a dignity in stillness, a quiet confidence that says, I don't need to be loud to be clear. I don't need to be angry to be firm. I don't need to match your energy to know my own. This is not retreat. This is centeredness. It's what allows you to stay grounded while the world spins. In Buddhism, this is called upekkha, equanimity. It's not emotional numbness, it's emotional balance, the ability to hold both joy and sorrow without being pulled apart by either. To hear harshness without becoming harsh, to witness suffering without collapsing. Equanimity allows you to stay present, not because everything is calm, but because you are. And this stillness has ripple effects. It changes how others respond to you. It de-escalates conflict. It models another way of being, one where urgency isn't glorified, where quiet isn't feared, where being still is not giving up. It's choosing a different kind of power. This does not mean being passive in the face of injustice. Stillness does not silence action, it refines it. It ensures that your response comes from wisdom, not from woundedness. That when you speak, you're not just echoing noise, you're offering clarity. That when you act, it's with purpose, not panic. Stillness protects your energy. In a world that profits from your distraction, your outrage, your constant engagement, choosing stillness is a refusal to be manipulated. It's choosing your own pace, your own breath, your own truth, even when the world screams otherwise. And it's not easy. The world pushes. It wants reaction. It wants opinion. It wants you to choose sides quickly, loudly, permanently. But the path of stillness is the path of observation, of letting the mud settle so the water clears. Only then can right action arise, not from pressure, but from peace. Practicing this means noticing the small moments, the sharp email, the sarcastic remark, the emotional flare in a conversation, And instead of responding immediately, you pause. You feel your feet. You notice your breath. You let the energy move through. And what's left is space, choice, peace. Even in activism, stillness is a tool. It allows resilience. It keeps you from burning out. It allows you to hold the long view, to stay engaged without being consumed, to show up again and again, not from fury alone, but from unwavering presence. That presence can fuel movements, not just moments. There's a Zen saying, "Don't speak unless you can improve upon the silence." Stillness teaches you how to honor that silence, not out of fear, but out of respect. Because silence is not empty, it's full of potential, full of listening, full of wisdom waiting to rise. Stillness is not static. It breathes, it listens, it adjusts. It's what allows insight to land. It's what turns reaction into response, chaos into clarity, motion into meaning. It's what gives you back the reins of your own mind. This practice isn't just external. It happens inside too. When your own thoughts start racing, when judgments flare up, when inner criticism tries to dominate the moment. Stillness doesn't argue. It watches. It returns to breath. It doesn't feed the fire. It waits for the flame to settle. That waiting is powerful because it breaks the pattern. It ends the addiction to drama, both internal and external. It says, "I'm not here to win arguments. I'm here to keep peace. Not a peace built on avoidance, but a peace built on truth. Truth that doesn't need to yell to be known." And stillness allows listening, deep listening, to yourself, to others, to life. When you're not formulating a reply, you actually hear what's being said. When you're not rushing to be heard, you start to notice the silence behind words. That silence is where understanding grows. That's where compassion begins. Even in relationships, stillness transforms conflict. You stop reacting to tone. You hear pain beneath defensiveness. You respond to the heart, not just the volume. You no longer need to win. You want to understand. And that shift heals more than any perfect phrase ever could. Stillness is a form of protection. It keeps you from wasting energy, from saying things you don't mean, from doing things you'll regret. It gives you time to check in. Is this mine to carry? Is this true? Is this helpful? And if not, you let it pass. You stay rooted. You will still care. You will still hurt. But you will no longer hand your nervous system to every headline, every comment, every emotional wave that crashes into your day. You'll feel, but you won't drown. You'll speak, but only when words serve peace. You'll act, but only when action is aligned. This is not about perfection. You will still slip. You will still react sometimes. But each time you remember, each time you return to stillness, the gap between reaction and awareness gets wider. And in that gap, wisdom lives. Stillness is not something you find once. It's something you return to over and over. It becomes your posture, your default, your protest. A way of saying, I will not be ruled by chaos. I will not be pulled from my center. I will meet the world with presence, not panic. This is how stillness becomes a statement. Not by withdrawing from life, but by refusing to let life steal your clarity. Not by silencing your voice, but by using it when it truly matters. Not by hiding, but by standing so deeply rooted in peace that nothing can shake you out of it. This is the silent strength the world forgets. But you don't have to forget. You can remember. You can return. You can choose the stillness that softens reaction into response. That transforms noise into awareness. That makes peace not a hope, but a way of being. And that choice, made again and again, is a revolution all its own. After learning how stillness can be a stance, a form of gentle resistance to the pull of the world's noise, something more delicate begins to emerge. A quieter invitation, not just to avoid reaction, but to discover what remains when even thought begins to slow. Beneath the decisions, beneath the commentary, beneath even the desire to find peace, there is something subtler, a space untouched by words, not silence as absence, but silence as presence. The moment a single thought falls and nothing rushes in to replace it, that is where peace begins to speak. Most of the time, the mind is like a room full of voices, each competing to be heard. Some are loud and sharp, worries, memories, plans. Others whisper constantly, self-doubt, mental rehearsal, old judgments. Even when you are sitting still, these voices can fill the space. And because the mind has been trained to believe thinking equals existing, silence feels unnatural, unsettling. But that discomfort is not a sign something is wrong. It's the sign that something unfamiliar is about to be discovered. Buddhist practice points gently toward this discovery, not by force, not by silencing the mind through willpower, but by bringing awareness so close to the present moment that thought begins to fade on its own, not because it was pushed away, but because it no longer finds a place to land. The breath becomes enough, the feeling in the hands, the warmth in the chest, the simple rhythm of being. These become so alive that thought slows, then stops. And in that stop, there is no absence. There is presence. Mental quietude is not the goal. It is the result, the natural outcome of a mind that is no longer searching. When you are not trying to improve the moment, when you are not rehearsing your value, when you are not identifying with your internal narrator, thoughts begin to fall like leaves, gently, one by one, and in the space between them, peace breathes. The sound of one thought falling is not audible in the traditional sense, it is felt. It is the soft internal shift when the mind loosens its grip and returns to stillness. When you realize that you don't need to respond to every thought, that most of what passes through the mind isn't instruction, it's habit, and that habit loses power the moment you stop identifying with it. This kind of inner quiet is not passive, it is deeply awake, a presence that doesn't sleepwalk through experience, but receives it fully without commentary. You see the color of a leaf without naming it. You feel an emotion without turning it into a story. You watch the moment unfold and do not rush to place it into a category. That kind of presence is rare, but it's always available. It just waits for your willingness to hear it. The difficulty is not the presence itself, it's the addiction to noise. The belief that thinking is helping. That narration is necessary, but most of the time, thought is repeating itself, saying the same thing in different ways, worrying in circles, fixing what isn't broken. Commentary is not clarity, it's distraction dressed as effort. And when you begin to see that, the mind starts to slow, not because you made it, but because you stopped feeding it. Stillness in thought doesn't mean thought disappears forever. It just stops dominating. It becomes background, like a river that continues to flow, but no longer drowns the one standing beside it. You don't have to stop the current. You only have to stop diving into it every time it moves. Meditation offers this training, not as an escape, but as a return. You sit, you breathe, thoughts come, and you watch. You don't follow, you don't argue, you don't label. And slowly, something shifts. The gap between thoughts gets wider. The urge to engage gets weaker. And then, just for a moment, there is nothing. No thought, no commentary, just presence. And in that presence, peace is not something you find. It's what you already are. This state can be unsettling at first. The ego wants something to hold. A thought, a goal, a position. But in this space, there's nothing to cling to, no identity to maintain, just awareness, that raw, open seeing. And from it comes not fear, but relief, a letting go of all the effort to be someone, to know something, to get somewhere. It's in this silence that the body relaxes, that healing happens without demand, that emotion releases without analysis. Because without mental interference, the system resets itself. Peace isn't added, it's revealed. This experience also shifts how you relate to thinking outside of meditation. You stop reacting to every inner message. You become selective, not by force, but by familiarity with what silence offers. You know now what it feels like to not be pushed by thought. So when thought arises, you ask, is this useful? Is this kind? Is this needed? And if not, you let it fall. The mind doesn't like silence because it can't control it. But awareness isn't here to be controlled. It's here to witness. And the more you trust that witnessing, the more thought loses its grip. Not because you've stopped thinking, but because thinking no longer stops you. This shift also deepens intuition, because when the mental noise settles, something quieter begins to speak. A knowing not made of words, a clarity that doesn't come from logic, but from presence. Insight begins to arise, not from analysis, but from stillness. Not from trying, but from listening. Even daily life begins to feel different when you carry this silence with you. A walk becomes rich. A conversation becomes deeper. A moment of waiting becomes spacious instead of frustrating, because you're no longer filling every gap. You're letting gaps be gaps, letting life breathe between thoughts. This is why monks speak slowly, why they pause before answering, why they walk as if they're not going anywhere. Because they are listening, not just to the world, but to the silence inside it. They have learned to hear the sound of one thought falling and not rush to replace it. You don't have to live in a monastery to feel this. You only need to be willing to stop reaching for the next distraction, the next comment, the next thought that makes you feel productive. Peace is not born from busyness. It's born from presence, from the courage to be in the moment without improvement. And you don't need long hours to find it. Sometimes all it takes is one breath, one moment of watching a thought arise and choosing not to follow it, not to edit it, not to amplify it, just to see it fall and to stay with what remains. That remaining is everything. It's not blank. It's full. It's full of softness, awareness, quiet joy. It's full of being. And being doesn't require explanation. It just requires your return. You may still have days when the mind is loud, when thoughts race. That's okay. The point is not perfection. The point is practice. And each time you return to silence, it welcomes you, without judgment, without scorekeeping, because silence doesn't ask you to be worthy. It just asks you to stop and listen. And the more you listen, the more you realize silence is not absence. It's what holds everything. It's what lets the next moment rise with grace. It's what allows you to meet life without needing to name it. This is the sound of one thought falling, not a void, but a return. A return to what you never left, to what has always been beneath the noise, to peace that doesn't need words to be known, to stillness that speaks without sound. And when you live from that place, everything changes, not because the world is different, but because you are no longer reacting to its every thought. You are resting in the space between, where peace is not a destination, but a home you never knew was always yours. When the mind becomes quiet, when thought no longer pulls you in every direction, a deeper kind of peace begins to settle. But something else begins to stir too, a subtle itch to be known, to be seen, to be recognized for the quiet work happening within. Even silence, even presence, can be filtered through the lens of identity. This is where the ego tries to step back in, not loudly, but with the soft voice of, "Look how calm I am," or "Let me be the example." To truly rest in peace, you must go further than silence. You must step beyond the need to be witnessed. This is where the real letting go begins. The ego thrives on recognition. It doesn't matter if it's praise or criticism. What it fears most is being unseen. The desire to be understood becomes a kind of invisible tether, constantly pulling the mind back into performance. Even when you think you've let go, the ego asks, who saw it? Who noticed? Who approved? This constant reach for validation isn't always loud or dramatic. It shows up in quiet ways, in hoping someone sees your effort, in waiting for a response to your vulnerability, in replaying a conversation, wondering if you were misunderstood. And in each of these moments, your peace is traded, not for truth, but for attention. Living without needing to be seen is not about becoming invisible to others. It's about becoming transparent to yourself. You still exist, you still feel, you still act, but you no longer build your identity around how others respond. Their view of you becomes information, not oxygen. You don't push it away, but you don't breathe it in as your source of worth. This disrobing of the ego is gentle. It's not a war. It's a quiet undressing. Layer by layer, you take off the roles, the need to be liked, the need to impress, the need to correct every misunderstanding. And underneath all of it, there's still you, still presence, still awareness, completely untouched by approval or rejection. Buddhism teaches that the self is a construct, a useful one for daily functioning, but a trap when clung to. The ego is not evil, it's just confused. It believes that survival depends on being seen in a certain way. But when you see through that, something liberating happens. You stop needing to curate your image. You stop rehearsing how to be perceived. When you live without needing to be admired, your actions become cleaner. You speak because it's true, not because it will make you look wise. You help because it's needed, not because it builds your identity as the helpful one. You show up because it's right, not because it earns you respect. This shift feels light, like dropping a heavy costume after a long performance. This does not mean isolating yourself from the world. It means engaging without dependency. You can still connect, still love, still share. But now you do so from fullness, not from lack. The emptiness you once tried to fill with praise is now met with presence, with being. Letting go of the need to be seen also means making peace with being misunderstood. This is one of the deepest pains for the ego, not just to be unseen, but to be wrongly seen, misjudged, mislabeled. But the truth is, no one can ever fully see you. They see their version of you, their lens, their projection, and when you accept that, you stop trying to manage perception. You stop trying to correct every version of you that exists in someone else's mind. You are not responsible for how others interpret your being. You are only responsible for the sincerity of your presence. And when that sincerity is enough for you, you are free. This freedom shows up in unexpected ways. You stop over-explaining. You stop apologizing for who you are. You stop dressing your truth in language meant to keep everyone comfortable. You become quiet, not because you're hiding, but because you no longer need to perform. And in that quiet, you find your real voice. Relationships also shift. When you stop needing to be understood, you become a better listener. Because you're not waiting for your turn to speak, to be validated, to be right. You're simply there. Open, present, unconcerned with how you're seen. And that kind of presence invites others to do the same. In this state, your value is no longer up for debate, not because everyone agrees on it, but because it's no longer rooted in agreement. It exists on its own. Like a tree in the forest, valuable not because someone calls it beautiful, but because it grows, because it gives shade, because it exists. Even creativity becomes freer when it's no longer tied to image. You stop creating for likes, for praise, for reputation. You create because something moves through you, and whether it's seen or not, praised or not, it remains a gift, a release, a prayer without a need for echo. To disrobe the ego is not to lose your identity. It's to see that identity was never solid to begin with, that it's made of thoughts, reactions, memories, and hopes, none of which need to define you. You can use them like tools, but you are not them. You are the one aware of them. Even spiritual practice can feed the ego. The idea of becoming enlightened, awakened, evolved, these can become costumes too, roles to be admired. But true awakening is ordinary. It's not interested in being admired. It's interested in being real. It's the ability to be with what is, without decoration. Letting go of being seen also heals comparison. Because when you're not trying to prove your worth, you stop measuring it against others. You celebrate their light without dimming your own. You no longer need to be the best. You just need to be here, present, honest, awake. And in this honesty, rest is possible. You don't need to scan the room. You don't need to gauge reactions. You don't need to curate your every move. You can exhale. You can soften. You can let people see you or not and remain whole. This doesn't mean closing your heart. It means opening it without demand, without needing it to be mirrored. You still feel joy in connection, but you don't crumble when the mirror doesn't reflect what you hoped, because your image is not the point. Your being is. In Buddhist terms, this is the release of mana, the conceit of I am. Not just arrogance, but the whole structure of me, mine, my story. Letting go of that structure is not erasure, it's liberation. It's the realization that you never needed to be a certain way to be whole. Even in solitude, this truth is tested. Are you peaceful when no one knows what you're doing? When no one sees your goodness, your effort, your growth? That's the measure. If peace remains even there, you've touched something real. And if not, that's okay too. Awareness is the first step. You see the need to be seen. You see the performance beginning. And instead of judging it, you breathe. You stay. You feel the tightness behind the mask. And you loosen it. You let yourself just be. Over time, this becomes a refuge, a return, a knowing that your value is not up for review, that your presence is not a presentation, that your truth doesn't need permission to exist. This is the disrobing of the ego, not an act of rejection, but of release. You stop holding up your image like a shield. You stop dressing yourself in expectations, and beneath all of it, you find something softer, quieter, more peaceful than praise could ever be. You find yourself, not the idea of you, not the reflection of you, just you, whole, breathing, undressed, and free. Once the need to be seen dissolves, and the fragile armor of the ego gently falls away, a new kind of silence appears. It isn't the silence of serenity. Not yet. It's the silence that reveals who's still waiting in the corner. The parts of you that weren't polished enough for the stage. The pieces that were pushed down, edited out, disowned. What happens when there's no more image to protect is that the inner stranger begins to speak. And if you're willing to sit beside them, without flinching, without correcting, true acceptance begins. Not because you've conquered the shadow, but because you've stopped running from it. Everyone carries these hidden parts. Not because something went wrong, but because it's part of being human. Somewhere along the way, certain feelings, desires, fears, and memories didn't feel safe to express. Maybe they were punished. Maybe they were misunderstood. Maybe they were just too painful to hold in the open, so they were buried. But buried doesn't mean gone. Buried means waiting, for safety, for presence, for light. The Buddhist path isn't about becoming pure in the way society defines purity. It's about becoming whole. And wholeness includes the shadow, not as a problem to solve, but as a part of the inner family. Until these neglected pieces are acknowledged, they haunt. They interrupt peace. They leak out in anger, in insecurity, in patterns that feel automatic, but are actually just unhealed voices begging to be heard. Shadow work is not a mental exercise. It's a sitting down, a quiet turning toward what you'd rather avoid. It's meeting the part of you that feels shame, the part that lashes out, the part that still holds resentment, still craves recognition, still fears abandonment. And instead of arguing with it, you sit, you breathe, you listen, you make room. This sitting is powerful because it breaks the cycle of internal exile. Every time a thought arises that says, This part of me is wrong, and you watch it without agreeing. You're healing. Not because you changed the feeling, but because you didn't run from it. You didn't add rejection to what was already rejected. The shadow doesn't need to be cleaned up. It needs to be felt, fully, safely, held in presence instead of shame. That's what begins to integrate it, not approval, but attention. When the mind no longer splits into acceptable and unacceptable, peace becomes possible. Because inner conflict only lives in division. When all parts are allowed, calmness returns. This work often brings discomfort. Old feelings rise, regrets resurface, but the goal is not to relive pain, it's to relate to it differently, to stop seeing it as the enemy. Pain is not proof of failure, it's the echo of a moment that didn't receive enough compassion the first time. Now, you offer it. This offering doesn't come through words. It comes through presence, through staying. You stay when the sadness comes. You stay when the old anger flares. You stay when the mind says, "This again?" And in that staying, the inner stranger begins to trust you, begins to soften, begins to tell its story. And the story is never what you thought. It's not evil, it's not weak, it's wounded, it's scared, it's trying to protect something. And once that becomes clear, the part you called bad becomes understandable, not excusable, but human. And that shift changes everything. Buddhism doesn't ask you to get rid of your desires, your flaws, your habits. It asks you to see through them, to understand their origin, to stop identifying with them while also stopping the war against them. That's what non-attachment really means. Not rejection, but release. Shadow integration is about compassion that includes even the ugliest moments. Not because those moments are beautiful, but because they're part of a larger truth. The person who reacted badly, who broke down, who made mistakes, that version of you was trying to cope. And now, instead of punishment, you offer peace. You don't excuse the harm, but you stop hating yourself for surviving in messy ways. You see the younger version of you, the desperate one, the guarded one, the quiet one who tried to disappear, and you sit beside them like a friend. No lectures, no fixing, just presence. In this space, you no longer need to justify your shadow to others. You don't need it to be understood, because you've already made peace with it. You've already accepted that wholeness is not light alone. It is light meeting darkness without fear. This meeting creates a new kind of confidence. Not the bravado that needs to hide flaws, but the quiet strength of someone who knows their own depths and no longer fears being exposed. Because there's nothing left to hide. There's nothing you can be accused of that you haven't already sat with and forgiven. Shadow work also reveals patterns. The anger that always comes up when you feel ignored, the defensiveness when you're criticized. These are not character flaws. They're unhealed wounds reacting to new situations. And once seen clearly, they can be responded to, not acted out. Even thoughts of unworthiness are part of the shadow. I'm not enough. I'm too much. I'll never change. These thoughts are not true, but they come from somewhere true. A moment when love was withheld or pain was misunderstood. By sitting with them, not indulging them, you break their power. You also stop needing others to fix what's been internalized. You stop handing people the responsibility for making you feel whole, because you've started giving that to yourself. not by building a perfect self-image, but by welcoming every part that isn't perfect. And this changes how you hold others too. When you've faced your own shadow, you become less reactive to theirs. You no longer judge harshly. You no longer fear being triggered, because you recognize that everyone is carrying their own inner stranger, and they may not have sat with theirs yet. That compassion doesn't make you naive. It makes you precise. You can set boundaries without blame. You can speak truth without cruelty. You can love without illusion, because you're not trying to manage your discomfort through others' behavior. Sitting with your shadow also allows you to rest, because hiding takes energy. Performing peace is exhausting, but when nothing is being hidden, your system relaxes, your breath deepens, your sleep improves. You stop waiting for the next emotional ambush because there's nothing left to suppress. Shadow integration is not a destination. It's a relationship, one that deepens over time. Some days it's gentle, other days it's hard. But every time you turn inward with kindness, the shadow softens. Every time you choose presence over punishment, something heals. And in that healing, a new self begins to emerge. Not a better version, but a truer one. A version that no longer hides behind performance, that no longer fears its own reflection, that no longer sees pain as proof of failure, but as a signal for care. This is the quiet revolution. You stop running. You stop dividing. You stop waiting for perfection to deserve peace. You let your whole self sit in the room, and when all parts are welcome, the war ends. You don't become enlightened by becoming flawless. You come closer to peace by embracing the flawed parts with honesty and love. The parts that shake, the parts that rage, the parts that just want to be held. And when you can hold yourself without fixing, without fleeing, that's when something inside relaxes. That's when the shadow no longer feels like a stranger. That's when peace becomes possible, not because you erased the dark, but because you learned to walk with it in the light. Once the inner stranger is no longer feared, once you've sat beside the hidden parts of yourself and welcomed them into the light, another shift begins to unfold. You notice that many of the impulses once thought to be essential were actually forms of grasping, a reaching, a quiet hunger, not for survival, but for something to hold on to. And under that grasping lies the craving to control, to possess, to secure. But what if joy wasn't found through acquiring or achieving, but through release? What if true happiness comes not from more, but from less? From letting go without losing your aliveness? Desire is not the problem. In Buddhist practice, it is craving, the tight, clenched, anxious reaching that causes suffering. The belief that peace, love, or fulfillment live somewhere out ahead, and that you must grasp for them before they slip away. This is not the natural longing of the heart. It is the grasp of fear, the fear that without clinging, nothing will remain. But when grasping fades, something unexpected happens. Joy arises, not because you forced it, but because space was finally made for it. A joy that is not attached to conditions, not tied to whether things are going your way. It's the joy that comes from not needing the moment to be different, the joy that flows when nothing is being chased. This kind of joy is often misunderstood. People think that if they give up craving, they'll become numb, that life will lose its color, its spark, its sweetness. But it's actually the opposite. Grasping dulls experience. It overlays even the most beautiful moments with tension, with the anxiety of loss. When you're clinging to a sunset, you're not seeing it, you're fearing its end. But when you let go of needing it to last, you actually feel it more deeply. It lives in you instead of being consumed by you. Letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop needing. It means you stop using experiences as proof that you're okay. You stop using people as cures for your emptiness. You begin to enjoy without ownership, to experience without control, and in that openness, joy becomes natural, not as a spike, but as a state. Joy without craving is light. It's soft. It comes in quiet moments, when you're walking and the breeze brushes your face, when you're eating and truly tasting, when you're talking and not trying to impress. These are not peaks of happiness, they're the steady hum of freedom from hunger. That freedom feels like joy because it is. Desirelessness does not mean detachment from life. It means connection without addiction, presence without possession. You can still want, still dream, still love, but now those feelings are rooted in clarity, not desperation. You move toward things because they matter, not because you fear what happens if you don't. This shift also transforms how you relate to goals. You can still act, plan, create, but now there is space between effort and identity. Success becomes something to enjoy, not something to validate your existence. Failure becomes information, not devastation. You stop clinging to outcomes because your peace isn't hostage to them anymore. In Buddhist terms, this is the difference between tanha, thirst, and chanda, wholesome intention. One is rooted in lack, the other in alignment. Grasping says, I need this to be whole. Intention says, this feels true, and I move toward it without needing to possess it. That difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Letting go of craving also softens fear, because fear is often just desire in disguise, desire to avoid pain, to maintain safety, to keep control. But when grasping fades, you no longer need to hold life so tightly. You trust that even if things change, even if they fall apart, you won't. You'll feel, you'll adapt, you'll continue. This trust doesn't make you passive, it makes you relaxed. A relaxed person doesn't stop living. They live more fully, because they're no longer trying to shape life into something it's not. They meet life where it is, and they find joy there, not because it's perfect, but because they're finally present enough to receive it. Even in love, desirelessness deepens connection. You stop needing the other person to complete you, to mirror you, to rescue you. You love them for who they are, not for how they make you feel. This kind of love is spacious. It doesn't grasp. It doesn't beg. It simply offers itself, and in return, it invites the same. Non-grasping also brings gentleness to your inner world. You stop trying to fix every emotion. You stop needing every day to be meaningful. You allow the ordinary. You allow boredom. You allow silence. And those very things, once seen as empty, begin to glow. Not because they changed, but because you did. Even pain becomes softer when there's no grasping. You no longer fight it as a problem to solve. You hold it as a visitor to witness. You stop needing it to go away in order to be okay. That doesn't mean you like pain. It means you're not enslaved by your dislike of it. This is what makes joy without craving so profound. It's joy that doesn't depend on pleasure. It's joy that doesn't collapse when things shift. It's joy rooted in being, not getting. That kind of joy can be felt while washing dishes, while grieving, while doing nothing special, because it's not tied to experience. It flows from freedom. And you don't need to renounce the world to feel this. You just need to notice when you're grasping, to pause before you reach, to ask gently, what am I trying to hold on to? What am I afraid of losing? And in that moment of honesty, something opens, not because you forced it, but because you stopped tightening around it. This softening is not dramatic, but over time, it rewires everything. You no longer panic when plans change. You no longer spiral when someone disappoints you. You no longer rush to fill the silence. You let things be as they are, and that letting becomes joy. You can still pursue beauty, connection, creation, but now those pursuits are expressions of fullness, not symptoms of lack. You do things because they matter, not because they patch a hole. And the more you live this way, the more joy becomes your resting state, not your rare exception. Even ambition transforms. You no longer burn out trying to reach some imagined point of satisfaction. You move with purpose, but not with pressure. You trust that if something is meant for you, it will unfold, and if not, something else will. Your worth isn't riding on it. Desirelessness also reveals the truth about time. Grasping lives in the future, in when I have this, or when that happens. But freedom lives in now. Because now is the only place you're not reaching, you're receiving. And receiving is where joy begins. This receiving doesn't mean stopping. It means moving from a different place. Not from hunger, but from harmony. Not from fear, but from trust. You're still alive, still awake, still engaged, but no longer enslaved. And in that freedom, joy becomes simple again. Not always ecstatic, but warm, quiet, steady. The joy of a bird passing overhead, the joy of a deep breath, the joy of not needing anything to be different in order to be at peace. This is the joy of non-grasping, the happiness that arises not when you get what you want, but when you no longer need to hold it so tightly. The moment when presence is enough, when silence is enough, when being is enough. And once you've tasted that, once you've felt joy that doesn't cling, you no longer chase the fleeting. You rest in the enduring, not because you stopped desiring, but because desire no longer controls you. Joy does, peace does, and that is more than enough. When joy no longer clings, when it rises not from craving but from calm, a new kind of happiness begins to unfold. It's not the high-pitched laughter of chasing peak experiences. It's not the rush of a dream finally reached. It's softer, deeper, quieter. It lives beneath the noise. It doesn't sparkle to be noticed, but shines because it's free. This is the joy that monks carry in their smile, not because life has spared them pain, but because they've made peace with it. Not because they have everything, but because they've stopped needing anything to feel whole. The monk's smile is different from the smiles worn for cameras, approval, or small talk. It doesn't sell anything. It doesn't hide anything. It's not trying to win affection or soften rejection. It's simply the face of someone who is not at war within. Someone who no longer argues with reality, no longer resists the present, no longer chases meaning from the future. It's a smile born not from mood, but from alignment. This smile doesn't need a reason. That's what makes it powerful. It's not caused, it's uncovered. When agitation fades, when the push and pull of thought subsides, when the heart rests back into being, this joy simply shows up. Like sunlight behind clouds, it was never gone, it was just covered. In Buddhism, joy is not the opposite of sadness. It's the absence of friction, the absence of the inner split that comes from craving, from resistance, from pretending to be what you're not. And when that split heals, even pain is held with ease. Even sorrow has room to breathe. The joy doesn't erase them, it makes space for them. This space is what allows monks to smile even in silence, even in simplicity, even in uncertainty. They are not smiling because something just happened. They are smiling within whatever is happening, because their joy doesn't come from conditions, it comes from clarity. Clarity that life will continue to rise and fall, that people will come and go, that the body will age, that comfort will ebb and flow. But through it all, there is a stillness that does not move, a presence that doesn't vanish. And when you live from that presence, joy becomes natural. The monk's smile is not about denying the world. It's about seeing it clearly, its impermanence, its beauty, its sorrow, and still choosing peace. It's a smile that says, I don't need this to last to appreciate it. I don't need to own this moment to belong in it. I don't need to fix anything to love what is. This joy is often missed because it isn't loud. It doesn't flash or declare itself. It whispers, it hums, it stays when the excitement ends. It lingers when the crowd goes home. It sits beside you in silence and reminds you, this too is enough. Cultivating this joy doesn't mean forcing a smile. It means practicing stillness. The more you sit with yourself, without reaching, without numbing, without performing, the more you start to feel it. It's not manufactured, it's remembered. You don't create it, you uncover it. You uncover it when you let go of perfection, when you stop needing every emotion to be pleasant, when you allow your mind to be messy, your heart to be tender, your life to be unfinished, and still trust that peace is possible. Monks train in this through discipline, but the core of it is available to everyone. It begins with awareness, with seeing how often the mind resists the present, how often it says, this isn't it, and how every time it does, suffering returns. But when the mind finally says, this is enough, something softens, and in that softening, joy enters. This joy is not about feeling good all the time. It's about being good with whatever you feel. It's about no longer pushing away discomfort or clinging to pleasure. It's about letting the moment be as it is, and trusting that you can still meet it with a smile. That smile may be small, it may be subtle, but it changes everything, because it signals to the nervous system that the war is over, that you're no longer searching, that you're no longer running, that you're home, right here, in the middle of whatever life is offering. Even in solitude, this joy stays, because it's not dependent on validation. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be reflected back to be real. It's internal, It's steady, it's yours, not because you earned it, but because you stopped rejecting it. This smile doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything is allowed to matter without controlling you. You can care deeply, love fully, grieve honestly, and still smile. Because your peace is not fragile. It's not conditional. It doesn't vanish at the first sign of pain. And when you start to live from this kind of joy, you move differently. You don't rush. You don't chase. You don't panic. You live with intention, but without tension. You give without needing credit. You speak without needing to be right. You show up without needing to be perfect. That freedom shows in your face, not in an artificial grin, but in the softness around your eyes, in the way your breath stays steady when others lose theirs, in the way you listen, not waiting to respond, but truly hearing. This is the quiet strength of the monk's smile, a strength that comes not from armor, but from openness. This joy is resilient. It weathers storms. It doesn't deny difficulty. It stays through it. It holds sadness the way a mother holds a crying child, without flinching, without judgment, just with presence. And in that holding, something heals. You don't need a monastery to feel this. You need patience. You need presence. You need to sit with yourself long enough to see what's underneath the grasping, underneath the roles, underneath the noise. And what you'll find is not emptiness. It's ease. Ease that laughs without needing a reason, that rests without guilt, that gives without fear, that forgives without keeping score. This is what the monk's smile reflects. Not a life without pain, but a heart that no longer fears it. You may not smile like this every day, but even a moment of it can rewire something, can remind you that peace is not far, that joy is not a reward, that your natural state is not urgency, it's stillness. And the more you return to that stillness, the more often the smile returns. Sometimes on your face, sometimes in your breath, sometimes in the way you see the world with soft eyes, not trying to own it, just letting it be. This is the monk's smile, not a performance, not a possession, a posture of inner freedom, a sign that the storm has passed, not outside, but within, and what's left is a gentle joy, resting quietly where conflict once lived. You can carry this smile, not always on your lips, but always in your way of being, in the way you move through the world, in the way you meet yourself with kindness, in the way you trust that nothing needs to be added for this moment to be complete. And that trust, above all, is what makes the smile real. When joy arises without force, when the heart smiles without needing approval or outcome, something inside begins to loosen even further. The grip that once clenched tightly around timing, fairness, and results begins to release. The need to steer every detail fades. There is a quiet realization that not everything must be wrestled into shape. Some things, maybe most things, are meant to unfold on their own, not through control, but through trust. And that trust finds its strength in one of the oldest teachings of all, karma. Karma is often misunderstood as punishment or reward, but in Buddhism, it is something much simpler and far more intimate. Karma is cause and effect. It's action and consequence. It's the unseen thread that connects intention with unfolding. Every thought, word, and deed plants a seed. That seed grows when the conditions are right, not when forced, not on command, but in its own season. Understanding karma changes how you relate to time. It teaches patience. It invites humility. It softens the craving to know what comes next. Because once you realize that every moment is shaped by countless unseen forces, not just your effort, but the weight of past choices, circumstances, and timing, you stop demanding results. You start showing up for the planting and trusting the bloom. This doesn't mean becoming passive. It means becoming wise. Karma is not fate. It's not fixed. It's dynamic. You're still shaping the future with what you do now, but without needing to control the future's form. You begin to act from clarity, not control, from sincerity, not outcome, because you understand now that trying to dominate life only creates more knots. When you float on karma, you let the river carry you instead of trying to swim upstream every moment. You still move, you still choose, but you no longer panic when things shift or delay, because you know that every experience is a ripple of previous energy. You're not being punished, you're being shown. This shift quiets anxiety, because anxiety feeds on the illusion of control, the belief that if you do everything right, you can guarantee the result. But karma teaches that outcomes depend on many causes, not just your current input. Some seeds take time. Some never bloom because the conditions don't match. Some fruits come from trees you forgot you planted. That's not chaos. That's the unfolding. Trusting the unfolding doesn't mean giving up. It means doing your part with full presence and letting the rest be shaped by forces beyond your reach. It means resting in the knowledge that if your intention is clean, your action is already complete, regardless of the visible result. This way of moving through life transforms stress into stillness. You stop micromanaging the universe. You stop measuring success by how quickly things happen. You stop overthinking every choice. You do your best, then you let go. Not as a strategy, but as a way of being. Karma also teaches responsibility, not guilt, but ownership. You understand that your life is not random, it's the echo of your energy. And when you meet patterns that hurt, you don't blame the world. You look inward. You ask, what seed am I watering? What habit am I repeating? What belief am I feeding? And in that asking, you gain power. Not power to control the world, but to shift your relationship with it. This practice cultivates maturity, emotional steadiness, a kind of grounded calm that doesn't rise and fall with every win or loss. You're no longer just reacting, you're responding with awareness. You're shaping your karma with care. And you begin to see how often struggle comes not from the situation itself, but from the resistance to what is. You wanted it faster. You expected it easier. You believed it should have looked different. But life is not following your script. It's following its own rhythm. And the moment you align with that rhythm, peace returns. This peace doesn't mean you stop feeling. You'll still be disappointed, still face uncertainty, still have desires, but you'll no longer be ruled by them. You'll learn to hold them with space, to feel them fully but not collapse into them, to keep moving even when the way forward is unclear. Floating on karma means trusting that everything is moving according to its nature, that some lessons must repeat until understood, that some doors close for protection, not punishment, that your timeline is not the only one that matters. It means accepting delays without bitterness, facing loss without hardening, embracing change without clinging. Because you see now that fighting the current doesn't speed it up, it just exhausts you. But floating lets you stay awake while life rearranges itself. This is not about passive waiting, it's about active patience. Patience that acts, that tends the garden, that shows up every day, but no longer pulls at the roots to make things grow. That trusts that right effort, rooted in compassion and wisdom, is never wasted, and you start to see karma in every small thing. In how a kind word can shift someone's day, in how resentment poisons your own heart first, in how tiny acts of awareness plant seeds for a calmer mind tomorrow. Karma becomes personal, not abstract. It becomes your daily teacher. Even forgiveness becomes easier through karmic understanding. You stop needing to punish. You understand that everyone, including you, is acting from their conditioning, their pain, their ignorance. And while you still hold boundaries, you release the burden of vengeance. You trust that all actions bring their own result. You no longer have to carry the scorecard. This allows compassion to grow, not because people deserve it, but because you understand how heavy karma already is. You don't want to add more weight. You want to clear it. You want to stop the chain of harm, and you start with yourself. You also begin to release the stories of unfairness, not because life is always fair, but because fairness is not the point. Growth is. Healing is. Awareness is. And sometimes what feels like unfairness is actually a form of pruning, a stripping away of what blocks your deeper unfolding. Floating on karma means living in alignment. You choose actions not for applause, but for truth. You speak because it's necessary, not because it earns approval. You give because it feels right, not because it guarantees return. You become a quiet force, a presence that no longer needs to prove, only to be. And over time, the mind stops panicking, stops clinging, stops arguing with what is. It begins to see everything as a lesson, a mirror, a turning, not always comfortable, but always guiding. This doesn't mean you lose your will. It means your will is aligned with wisdom. You still make plans. You still move forward, but with flexibility, with a sense of dance instead of drag. Because you know the steps are not all yours to choreograph. This trust softens your days. It helps you sleep without looping. It helps you love without chains. It helps you rest without guilt. Because you've done your part, and now you're letting the current do its part. You stop trying to rush healing. You stop needing immediate clarity. You understand that the fruit takes time, that the unseen roots are part of the process, and that your job is not to rush the flower, but to water the soil. And even when the outcome doesn't match your hope, you don't fall apart. Because you weren't grasping, you were floating. You weren't betting your worth on the result. You were rooted in the action itself. And that root holds you steady. This is the quiet power of karma. Not a doctrine, but a way of seeing. A way of walking through the world with eyes open and hands steady. A way of surrendering without collapsing. Acting without attachment. Loving without fear. Living without control and thriving because of it. You float not because you've given up, but because you finally understand how to move with the river, not against it. You trust not because you know the future, but because you've come home to the present. And that trust becomes your freedom. When you stop fighting the current, when you begin floating through karma instead of wrestling with every twist, you find a quieter rhythm. But even with this trust, life doesn't always unfold gracefully. Storms still arrive, disappointment still knocks, people still break promises, and the world still spins unpredictably. The mud, as always, finds a way to splatter, and this is where many lose their footing. Because it's one thing to be peaceful in calm waters, it's another to stay balanced when life gets dirty, heavy, unfair. This is where equanimity becomes more than a concept. It becomes a lifeline. Buddhist equanimity isn't based on avoiding discomfort. It's not about achieving emotional detachment or walking above the mess. It's about staying rooted in peace while standing knee-deep in it. Equanimity is not the absence of difficulty. It's the refusal to let difficulty define your state of being. It means holding your center even when the ground feels unstable, and this, more than almost anything else, is what protects your inner freedom. To practice equanimity is to acknowledge the mud without becoming it. You feel the weight of chaos, but you don't collapse into it. You hold the pain without becoming bitter. You experience the unfairness without feeding blame. It's not apathy. It's not emotional suppression. It's clarity. It's the ability to respond with wisdom instead of reacting from panic. This kind of calm isn't glamorous. It doesn't always feel noble. Sometimes it looks like breathing through frustration instead of exploding. Sometimes it's walking away when your pride wants to stay and argue. Sometimes it's choosing not to retaliate when the hurt would justify it. These are small choices, but they are deeply powerful because they stop the cycle of suffering from growing. Equanimity doesn't ask you to be unfeeling. It asks you to stop being ruled by every feeling. It gives you space to acknowledge your emotions without drowning in them. You can feel sad without becoming sadness. You can feel anger without turning it into harm. You can feel fear without letting it make your choices for you. That space is freedom. That space is peace in motion. Life will not wait for you to be ready before it gets messy. People won't always treat you kindly. Plans won't always unfold neatly. You won't always have the answers, but you can always choose your posture. You can always return to the breath, to the body, to the present. This return doesn't fix the mud, it steadies you within it. Equanimity is built by sitting through discomfort without escaping, by learning how to stay with hard moments until they pass, because they always pass. And when you don't feed them with reaction, they move through more easily. You stop adding weight to what's already heavy. And when the outside world is spinning, equanimity says, I don't have to spin with it. You anchor into what doesn't change, awareness, presence, breath. You stay with what you can control, your response. You begin to see that most suffering isn't from what happens, it's from how the mind interprets what happens. And when you loosen the interpretation, you loosen the suffering. This doesn't mean dismissing pain. It means meeting it without exaggerating it, feeling it without dramatizing it, letting it pass without chaining your identity to it. You don't have to become your wound. You can sit beside it. You can care for it. But you don't have to become it. And this becomes even more essential in relationships. People trigger us, not because they're broken, but because they reflect our unfinished parts. Equanimity allows you to pause before reacting, to ask, what part of me is hurting right now? What am I believing about this moment? What can I let go of? This reflection creates peace not by controlling others, but by calming yourself. Even when you fail, when you lose your temper, when you fall into old patterns, equanimity helps you recover faster. Because you stop judging the fall, you get up without shame, you return without drama. The mind says, you should be better than this. Equanimity replies, this is what growth looks like. Come back anyway. Equanimity is also how you protect your energy. In a world that thrives on reaction, your non-reactivity becomes an act of rebellion, a boundary, a refusal to be pulled into every storm. You don't stop caring, but you care wisely. You stay present without absorbing everything. You give without depletion. This practice helps you hold space for others too. When someone is angry, you don't mirror it. When someone is panicking, you don't escalate it. You become a calm center in the middle of other people's storms, not because you're superior, but because you've trained your nervous system to stay grounded. And from that grounded place, you can help without losing yourself. Equanimity is cultivated over time, through meditation, through reflection, through being honest about your triggers. You start to see the patterns, the moments that knock you off center, the words that activate old wounds, the behaviors that pull you into old roles. And once you see them, you can soften your grip on them. It's not about being perfect, it's about becoming aware. And with awareness, you start to respond differently. You stop needing every situation to be ideal. You stop needing every person to behave the way you expect. You begin to allow people to be who they are. You allow life to unfold without forcing. That allowing isn't laziness, it's trust. Trust that you can handle what comes. That even when things fall apart, you don't have to fall apart with them. That peace is not the prize at the end of the storm. It's the posture you bring into it. This posture doesn't mean you're numb. It means you're stable. It means you can feel joy without clinging, grief without drowning, anger without destruction, love without possession. It means your heart is open, but your mind is steady. In Buddhist terms, this is called upekkha, equanimity, as the fourth of the Brahma Viharas, or sublime attitudes. It's not cold detachment, it's the highest form of love, the love that doesn't demand, the love that doesn't control, the love that remains even when things don't go your way, and it is a love you can turn inward. When your mind is chaotic, when your emotions flare, when you're tired and overwhelmed, equanimity says, this too. This moment too can be held with presence. You don't need to feel good to stay steady. You only need to stop resisting. This steadiness also reveals how little you truly need. You begin to see that most of your peace was lost not because of what happened, but because of your refusal to accept what happened. And once acceptance enters, suffering softens, not because it disappears, but because it's no longer fed. And this, more than anything, is what makes equanimity so rare. It is peace that doesn't depend, joy that doesn't grasp, clarity that doesn't argue. It's not built in perfect moments. It's built in the mess, the noise, the hard conversations, the missed expectations, the delayed answers. You don't need to escape the mud. You need to learn how to stand in it without sinking, to feel the weight without being crushed, to meet what's difficult without becoming someone you're not. This is equanimity in the mud. Not a spiritual bypass, not a denial of struggle, but the deep daily practice of choosing your center, even when everything around you tries to take it. And the more you choose it, the stronger it becomes. Not overnight, but breath by breath, return by return, until peace is not where you end up, but how you walk through it all. When you learn to stay calm in the mud, when you no longer demand that life be clean before peace is allowed, you reach a powerful threshold. At first, that calm is a steady posture, but go deeper, and something even more subtle begins to reveal itself. Beneath the calm, beneath the clarity, beneath even the resilience of equanimity, there is a silence untouched by emotion or effort. Not because you worked to get there, but because you stopped doing the one thing that blocks it, thinking. This is where peace begins, not through thought, but after it ends. Not through concepts, but through direct presence. Thinking is not the enemy. It solves problems, tells stories, builds bridges, and remembers names. But for all its usefulness, thinking never truly rests. It jumps from plan to regret, judgment to opinion, memory to prediction. And because most people live inside this constant stream, they confuse thinking with being. But being exists before thought, beneath thought, without thought. To rest in the thoughtless mind is not to become blank or lost. It is to become present without words. It is to experience reality as it is, not as the mind defines it. This is not passive zoning out. It is the highest form of clarity, pure awareness, free from interpretation. This state isn't rare because it's difficult. It's rare because it's unfamiliar. People aren't taught to stop thinking. They're taught to think more clearly, more often, more successfully. But no one tells you that the deepest truths don't come from the mind. They rise when the mind is quiet, like water settling when it's no longer stirred. When thought slows or pauses altogether, the mind doesn't disappear. It relaxes. It no longer projects labels onto everything. It no longer needs to compare or evaluate or remember. There is just this, pure seeing, pure being, the shape of a tree, the warmth of breath, the energy of the body sitting. These things become alive, not because the mind explains them, but because awareness is finally uninterrupted. Buddhist meditation points to this over and over, not as an idea, but as direct experience. When thoughts begin to fade, you're not left empty, you're left aware. That awareness holds everything, sensation, sound, space, and yet it clings to nothing. It watches without interfering. This is the taste of freedom that so many seekers miss, not in insight, but in silence. In this silence, something curious happens. The self begins to soften. The one who has opinions, the one who defends, the one who plans, loses importance. Not because you've erased your identity, but because you're no longer feeding it with constant commentary. You realize that most of what you called you was just a stream of thoughts. Resting in a thoughtless mind doesn't mean you never think again. It means thought no longer runs the show. It becomes a tool you pick up, not a trap you live inside. You can engage when needed, then return to the quiet. You start to spend less time narrating life and more time living it directly. This shift isn't mystical. It's natural. It's what young children experience all the time. Watching ants, staring at the sky, touching water. Fully engaged, fully awake. Not asking what it means. Not measuring, not remembering, not projecting. Just being. Thoughtlessness is not dull. It's vivid. When thought quiets, perception sharpens. Colors deepen, sounds grow clearer. You notice things, subtle shifts in air, faint feelings in the body that thinking used to drown out. This is not spacing out. It's the opposite. It's coming fully into contact with life. This contact is healing. Because most suffering begins in the mind. Stories of what should have been, fears of what might be. The present rarely hurts as much as the mind's commentary on it. But when commentary stops, peace appears. Not because the pain vanished, but because the mind stopped amplifying it. The thoughtless mind is not a goal to reach. It's a space to return to. And you can return again and again, in the pause between breaths, in the moment before you speak, in the space between sounds. These are not voids. They're doors. Doors to a place where nothing is wrong and nothing is missing. This place doesn't deny reality. It simply stops dividing it, stops labeling it as good or bad, success or failure. In this non-divided seeing, things are just as they are, not because you've approved them, but because you've stopped arguing with them. Resting in this space also changes how you relate to others. When you're not busy preparing responses or judging appearances, you actually hear people. You see them beyond roles, beyond behavior. Because your own self-image isn't dominating the moment, you allow space for theirs to soften too. This kind of presence is rare, and it's magnetic. Not because it's impressive, but because it's peaceful. You become the one who doesn't escalate, doesn't distract, doesn't need to fix. You become the calm in the room, not by controlling energy, but by no longer resisting it. Even creativity deepens in this space. Because real creativity doesn't come from overthinking, it comes from stillness, from the place where ideas are born, not constructed. Writers, artists, teachers, healers, all speak of the moment when inspiration just comes. That just comes moment is thoughtless awareness. The mind didn't make it. The silence allowed it. And you don't need hours to reach this space. You need willingness. You need to notice when thinking starts to spin, and instead of following it, return to the body, to sensation, to breath. These anchors are not primitive. They're precise. They cut through mental noise and bring you back to direct experience. In that directness, thought loses its stickiness. It may still pass by, but it doesn't pull you in. You watch it the way you watch a bird fly across the sky. Interesting, beautiful even, but not something you need to grab. The thought moves, and you remain. This remaining is peace. It's not a mood. It's not relief. It's the absence of grasping, of reaching, of needing thought to be a certain way. In that absence, a different kind of intelligence arises, not analytical, but intuitive. You just know, you just feel, you just respond, not from habit, but from presence. That response becomes your new rhythm. Less planning, more listening. Less reacting, more resting. not laziness, not avoidance, just clear seeing, free from noise. And this quiet intelligence is stable because it's not based on memory or comparison or identity. It's rooted in what is, not in what should be. And that root is unshakable. You'll still think, of course, but you'll also learn to rest in the space where thinking stops. And the more you rest there, the more natural it becomes. Until silence isn't something you visit, it's something you carry, even in motion, even in conversation, even in pain. This is the thoughtless mind, not empty, not dull, alive with presence, full of awareness, free of noise. It doesn't need belief, it doesn't need permission, it just needs your return. And every time you return, you're reminded, peace was never lost. It was just hidden behind commentary, hidden behind habit, hidden behind the need to name everything. But when the names fall away, when the stories rest, when the labels dissolve, what's left is real. What's left is you, not as an idea, but as a presence, quiet, open, clear, and from that presence, life begins again, not as something to manage, but as something to meet, fully, gently, without thought, but never without love. When the mind no longer clings to thought, when awareness becomes the resting ground beneath all opinions and labels, a subtle truth begins to rise. Peace does not require a special place, a perfect moment, or even a silent mind. What it truly requires is the end of resistance, that inner push against life, that constant argument with what is, that low-grade tension that says, this shouldn't be happening. That's what breaks your peace, not the event itself. And when resistance ends, freedom begins. Not freedom from life, but freedom within it. Non-resistance is often misunderstood. People think it means passivity, weakness, giving up. But in Buddhist wisdom, non-resistance is a profound act of inner intelligence. It's the refusal to keep fighting reality with every breath. It's the moment you stop trying to edit the present and instead begin living it. Every internal struggle starts with a refusal. Something happens and the mind says no. A change, a loss, a challenge. It arrives and the body contracts. The story begins. This isn't fair. This wasn't supposed to happen. I can't let this be. That push against what already is creates friction, and friction is suffering. To let go of resistance is not to pretend everything is fine. It's to stop needing everything to be different before you can be at peace. It's not that you approve of pain or injustice or difficulty. It's that you no longer let your reaction become another layer of harm. You meet the moment as it is, not as you wish it were. This doesn't mean giving up your voice. It means releasing the mental fight that steals your presence. You can still speak out, still act, still respond, but now your action comes from clarity, not tension. From centeredness, not control. From truth, not panic. Non-resistance begins the moment you stop arguing with the present. You feel the tightness. You notice the thoughts that say, this shouldn't be. And you soften. You allow it. Not because you agree, but because it's already here. And meeting what's here is the only place power exists. Resistance often hides in small moments. Traffic, delays, unexpected news. The mind tightens around disappointment and suddenly the moment becomes unbearable, not because of the thing itself, but because of the fight with it. Letting go of resistance in these moments doesn't mean you enjoy them. It means you stop letting them consume you. This surrender brings peace not by changing the outer world, but by releasing the inner war. You realize that clenching doesn't fix anything. It just drains your energy. It disconnects you from your breath, from your body, from your ability to respond wisely. Surrender, then, becomes power, not power over, but power with. It's a gentle dropping of the rope, the internal tug of war between how things are and how you think they should be. That rope has burned your hands for years. Surrender doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you care without fighting. You stay engaged, but free. This practice transforms grief. It doesn't stop the sadness, but it removes the second arrow, the story that grief is wrong. You feel the pain and you allow it. You cry and you let yourself cry without judgment. This letting is not weakness, it is the beginning of healing. Even in failure, non-resistance brings wisdom. You don't spiral into shame or defense. You sit with what happened. You face the discomfort without needing to blame or justify. And from that calm seeing, something new becomes possible. Insight, growth, a cleaner start. Non-resistance also frees you from perfectionism, from needing to always be right, always be calm, always have it together. It gives you permission to be human without self-attack, to fall and get back up without dragging a story of failure behind you. In relationships, resistance often shows up as control, wanting people to act differently, wanting conversations to go a certain way, wanting others to match your expectations. But the moment you try to control people, connection dies. When you stop resisting who they are, even when it's difficult, you create space for real dialogue. This doesn't mean tolerating harm. It means dropping the mental push that says, they shouldn't be this way, and replacing it with curiosity, with compassion, with truth that doesn't demand, but invites. This shift softens the tension in the room, and sometimes that softening is what opens the heart on both sides. The body also responds to non-resistance. Tension begins to melt, breath deepens, nervous system calms. Chronic tightness starts to loosen, not through force, but through the simple act of stopping the fight. Your body doesn't need to be fixed to be loved. Your pain doesn't need to disappear before you offer it kindness. This is the heart of non-resistance, kindness toward the moment. Even if the moment is heavy, even if it's disappointing, you meet it with presence instead of pushing. You breathe into it instead of bracing against it. And it moves, maybe slowly, maybe with discomfort, but it moves. You start to see how resistance tries to control time, wanting the future to arrive faster, wishing the past could be rewritten. But both efforts fail. The only place you can touch life is now. And resistance blocks that touch. Surrender restores it. And when you truly surrender to what is, there's a lightness, a sense of, this moment may not be what I planned, but it's real. I'm here for it. That presence becomes your strength, because now you're not wasting energy pretending. You're using your energy to respond. Buddhist practice calls this acceptance, not as resignation, but as wisdom. Accepting reality doesn't mean liking it. It means no longer arguing with it. And from that acceptance, action becomes cleaner, speech becomes truer, love becomes freer. This freedom is not loud. It doesn't look impressive, but inside, it's everything. You no longer live at the mercy of every change. You no longer fall apart when plans fall apart. You move with life, not in resistance to it. And life begins to move with you. Even in illness, surrender transforms experience. You stop fighting your body. You stop labeling yourself broken. You offer care instead of criticism. And the body often responds, not always with healing, but with relaxation, with a sense of being held, not rejected. Non-resistance also teaches you how to trust. Not blind trust, but trust in your capacity to meet the moment, to breathe through uncertainty, to walk through change without needing all the answers. That kind of trust builds slowly, but it becomes unshakable. And in this trust, peace returns, not as something you earn, but as something you remember. It was always there, beneath the struggle, beneath the noise, beneath the grip. You only had to stop fighting. This surrender is not a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Sometimes, a moment-by-moment one. The moment you notice the inner push, you pause, you soften, you say inwardly, "This too," and you come back. And each time you come back, the habit of resistance weakens. The mind stops needing to win. The heart stops needing to control. You begin to live in a kind of openness that can hold anything. This is the freedom of non-resistance, not freedom from difficulty, but freedom from the extra suffering caused by refusing what already is. It is the peace that comes when the internal war ends, not by force, but by surrender, by letting this moment be what it is, so you can meet it, live it, and move through it with grace. After walking through these teachings, something deeper than words remains, a stillness that doesn't depend on silence, a peace that doesn't demand perfection, a gentle joy that doesn't ask to be earned. You've explored the sacred space between thoughts, the strength of surrender, the clarity beyond craving, and the powerful calm that exists even in the middle of chaos. Not because life becomes easier, but because you've learned how to meet it differently, with less resistance, with more presence, with a heart wide enough to hold both pain and peace without needing to choose. You've learned that humility doesn't erase you, it frees you, that the pause between desires is not emptiness, but rest, that letting go of self-improvement doesn't mean apathy, it means wholeness, that your breath, your awareness, your ability to stop fighting reality, these are not small things. They are the doorway to everything you thought was missing. And now, as your eyes get heavier and your body begins to soften, let these teachings carry you, not as thoughts to memorize, but as a gentle way of being to return to, again and again, not striving, not forcing, just returning. If this journey touched something in you tonight, leave a comment below and write, "Peace is already within me." It's not just a phrase, it's a reminder. One your future self will be grateful you wrote down. And if this brought you clarity, stillness, or comfort in any way, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss another chance to reconnect with the part of you that already knows how to rest. Thank you for listening. Rest well, You are safe here.